October 14th, 2010, Goffstown Planning Board meeting. We'll go around and introduce the members at the head table. Brian?
I'm Brian Rose, I'm the town planner.
Steve Dutton, alternate.
Gayla Brook, Recording Secretary.
Alan Yaton, Chair.
Carlos Adams, member.
Pearl Foley, alternate.
On any votes for the next few minutes, the two alternates are...
Can we quiet the audience, please?
Excuse me?
Can we quiet the audience, please?
I left my gavel at home. Apologize for that, and I'll bring it in at this big. Anyways, welcome. In the first few minutes, let's just take care of some action items. We have the minutes from... Gentlemen, welcome.
Welcome.
We have the minutes from our meeting of September 23rd, 2010. Are there any corrections, omissions, additions from members of the board? Seeing none, no comments, omissions, or whatever, will somebody care to make a motion?
I'll move to accept the minutes as written.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Motion, motion by Lowell, seconded by Phil. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
Three abstentions. Okay. We had a pretty wild house that night, I guess. Second item on our agenda is an email that we received, referenced the third item on our old business agenda this evening. Brian, can you bring us up to speed on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the email basically just requested that the excavation project the application be withdrawn. So that appears as the third item on the agenda tonight. And so rather than, if anyone was here to listen to that hearing, rather than go through the whole meeting and then tell everybody at the end that this application's been withdrawn, we wanted to make the board aware and the public aware at the beginning. And then also, if the board wants to just formally act to, state, yes, we agree, or we accept the withdrawal or whatever, then I think that might have been done in the past for other withdrawals.
I believe in a withdrawal, or lack of process, there's been a motion to deny the application
Okay.
without
That would work.
prejudice.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Phil, seconded by Carlos. Any discussion on that motion? Call for a vote. We have all our board members, so two alternates would not be voting on this. All those in favor say aye.
Barbara's not here.
Barbara and Tim. Tim's not here.
Tim's not here.
Your math is suspect. It's been a long day. Yes, I apologize for that, gentlemen. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Would you like to bring us up to speed on the conceptual review application, the proposal? And what would you like us to do with it, Brian?
Mr. Chair, it's basically an attempt to make the application process a little bit more understandable for the applicants. I've written up a new application form, some procedure guidelines, and process document and a checklist, and then some submittal content requirements that applicants can use when they are coming to the town wanting to do a conceptual. This format is what I'm hoping to do for all of the applications for the town. I just wanted to start with the conceptual since that one's kind of an easy one, and get your buy-off on this new application process and format, and then move forward with the other applications after that. So just kind of wanted to get any of your comments, if you had any, based on what you saw, and if not, maybe an acceptance of the new format, and that's it.
Members of the board? Go right around the room. Lowell?
I thought the layout was pretty easy to follow, and I think having that little flow chart in there was a good addition.
Steve?
Yeah, I like it. I don't have any other comments other than it looks good to me.
Bill?
I was gonna say, there was nothing that jumped out to me that should be, not applied, but.
Carl?
The only thing I was looking for that I found later on was not binding. And at the very end, it says not bind either board or applicant, so I was fine with it. I like that.
Jim?
Well, having sat through some conceptuals where the people were just using our time when they haven't thought about their project, which I don't enjoy doing, I'm happy to impose some obligation of them to get their acts together before they come into it conceptual. So if this moves us in that direction, I'd be delighted, which isn't a comment on some that do come in fully prepared, but some ask questions that show they haven't even read the ordinance, and I don't think we should even entertain those.
Okay.
Carlos?
No, I like it. I think it's a big step forward, and I think it'll help a lot.
Robert?
I'm fine with it.
There's a consensus that we're all pleased with the results of this, and look forward to seeing some of the other forms that you might be working on to improve both the readability and their functionality. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
We'll go right to Main Street. Sign permit request for map 34, lot 36, Main Street Royal Cafe. Action needed. It's in your tonight's packet. On page 3 and 4. Or 3, excuse me. Brian.
Oh, there's two of them. Okay. Mr. Chair, this is and members of the board, this is a sign permit for an already existing sign that's been installed, and they're coming for the permit after the fact. All of the size of the sign and requirements of the zoning ordinance are met with the existing sign. The reason that it's coming to you is because it's in the village commercial area and requires a planning board approval. And I'll take any questions if you have them.
Members of the board?
Is there a current sign on the building now? Like a banner?
It is an existing sign, yes.
Okay.
They're applying for the permit now after they were
Okay.
harped upon by the zoning enforcement officer.
Other members of the board? Then I'll entertain some action.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Devanza,
Second?
seconded by Collis Adams. Any discussion on the motion? All heads here? So the alternates are non
We're missing Tim.
Where is he anyways?
He
Not
did-
here.
Is he
Not
still on
here.
vacation? Did they lose him in Italy or something?
He's back, but his wife told me that he would not be attending tonight.
Okay.
So, I need
All right. Steve will vote first, then. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Item 4 is a request to appoint a planning board member to the Economic Development Council. Action needed. Obviously, there's a letter in your correspondence package, reference that, and there was a short discussion at our last meeting about that. I find that my Tuesday evenings are being devoted to a charitable event at Camp Allen in Bedford on Tuesday evenings, which is when they meet, and I made a commitment to do that. Unfortunately, been looking for a new head. Is anybody willing to take a look at it or ask a question of what it's all about? Dan Reedy is the current chair. They have a couple things ongoing that they sponsor and work with, but it's really as a liaison with the Economic Development Council so that we're more aware of some of the things that go there first before they get here. So that there's some preemptive information. Members of the board,
And they meet every Tuesday?
once a month.
Once a month.
I can't do Tuesdays.
I
How about a motion to appoint Tim?
No, you want him to do CIP.
Oh, that's true.
Well, he pretty much said that he doesn't want to do that this year, so we're gonna be looking for somebody else to do that this coming year also. So,
And Jim rhymes with Tim.
Don't assume my longevity.
as far as, does it have to be a board member or can it be an alternate? I believe it can be an alternate.
Whatever the board
I
chooses.
think that's been done before.
I know most of us serve in some other capacity in town, on one way or another. So, would anybody like to volunteer?
No.
Then I'll accept nominations from the board members then.
Tim?
I'm not sure you can do that if you want to.
If Tim would do it, he'd request that he not be on CIP, I can tell you that right now.
And I think we better have that discussion with him.
Okay.
I'd rather. he
When
be
is
on
the next meeting?
Brian, I believe it's the second or third Tuesday of the month. It's usually the Tuesday prior,
It's the fourth Tuesday of the month.
the fourth Tuesday
So
of
it's
the
the
month?
same week as our meeting?
Yes.
Yes. Same week as the planning
On
board.
Tuesday
meeting.
evening from
2 days
6:30 to about
Most.
8 o'clock.
It's gonna be the 26th of October.
If somebody from the board is interested, I would certainly recommend that you go there and see what transpires and what they're working on before you make a commitment to it. I think that would be ideal. It's never been a large time commitment, it's more of an organizational kind of thing. And, the town liaison is Derek Horn. And, about all I can say at the moment. We have several events upcoming. And we try to do some projects that are kind of in the background, like trying to find somebody to occupy the mill, is one of the things that we've been working on. Haven't had any success there yet. Or other type of economic kind of things, like the rail trail has been, you've been to the Economic Development Council several times on the rail trail. Also hiking trails have been mapped. There's all kinds of those little projects that supposedly promote some type of economic benefit to the community by people being here and actively participating in the community. So, give it some thought. If there's some interest, please get in touch with Brian or Derek, and please attend the next meeting to see if it's something you might like to do.
What time are the meetings, Alan?
6:30, they're usually out by 8 o'clock.
And they're here, right?
They're right here in this same room, and I believe they're on the local cable television, community television network also. So, and I think you can also, the town website, I might stand corrected, that you can get some of the minutes live through the town website now, including the planning board. If you don't see them on the television.
Does it pay the same as this board?
Yes.
Twice as much.
Yes, twice as much. There's a lot of accolades and thank yous.
We get them regularly.
Moving on. Is there anything in the correspondence that we need to discuss with the board? Brian, I didn't see anything on there. All of those will be addressed in some, other than J, which was added, was the notice of intent to cut Pointer Fish and Game Club Snow Road. Can you,
I have not seen that actually, so that's something that just got put into the folder there, if you wanted to know anything about it.
if, during our 8:30 break, well, I'll look in the folder and see if there's any particular information on that.
I don't think Barbara heard you on that.
That's
so you
probably
might have to say
okay.
That again.
What did he say?
I didn't say anything.
I'm not, could I ask for the minutes to be read back, please?
I didn't get that part.
Yeah. Oh, well, then it needs to be resaid, so it can go in the minutes.
The minutes are not a transcript.
And asking as an attorney.
Okay. Yes.
Is B on the correspondence, it says Hillsborough County Design Shred, is that just the report, the final report, or is that something else?
You should have received in your packet a
Copy of
colored
it. Oh, that's what it was
package
okay.
of some of the basic
Yeah, I did see
concepts
that.
and some of the findings that the charrette committee came up with. As a board and as we reflect upon both master plan and other activities, whether we think about an invitation to the county to come here and talk to us about what they'd like to do, so that there's some concert in those activities. I know in the next few years, it's gonna most likely come to some, be coming to this board in some fashion. So if we're involved in the loop up front, it might very well benefit the community and the board here in terms of performance. They may ask us to, for some type of zoning amendment, because it's all zoned agricultural right now. In terms of all the county properties. So there may be some things that we'd like to talk to them about. Or at least we should send a volunteering letter to the county commissioners. Can we do that, Phil?
Don't see why not.
From you, Brian, just ask us, would you like to come and talk to us about what you'd like to do in the future? Just so that there's some concert of events and activities here at the community level too? We'll see what happens. Okay. I know there's been some interested, since I served on the charrette committee, there has been some interested developers in private discussions with the county.
Well, and you might, just as a practical matter, want to wait till, is our county commissioner up for election this year?
Carol Holden?
Yeah, I think she
Yes.
Every year there's one, I think.
Yes.
She's up this year, right? You might want to just wait till after the election. I mean, I'm not going to forecast the election results, but she's been pretty active and cognizant of the issues up there, and
And I see Tony Pappas about every Monday. So I could certainly approach her directly. That's what we needed to do, to try to make something happen. And I'm sure they'd welcome it too. That answer that question, Lowell?
Yep.
Anything else on that correspondence list? Seeing none, let's move right into our regular agenda under old business. Map 9, Lot 33-7, 46, and 60. Subdivision review hearing for a proposed 17-lot open space subdivision revised from 19 lots. Blackbriar Woods LLC and William and Elizabeth Cordes owners. Montalona Road and Black Brook Road zoned agricultural, continued from September 9th, 2010. Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This project is, as you stated, map 9 lots 33, 7, 40, and 60. Subdivision plat review for 17 lots. These lots are located between Montalona Road and Black Brook Road. This is the property up here on the screen. there's the aerial of the property. It's approximately 141.55 acres. And the most part of the property will be dedicated as open space area and to not be further subdivided. The request is to subdivide it again, as I said, into 17 lots. This is the layout of the project. The southern portions of the property have been left alone, and the northeastern corner is where the lots are going to be subdivided. This is a little bit of a zoom in on that view of the northeast corner. This is the landscape plan for the project. It shows just basically where the trees will be planted along the public road. And there's a couple of pictures of the plat here, broken down into two pieces, which we can use for reference in our discussion later on if we need to. The key considerations on the project, they've got several wetlands on the project, and they've been working on how to deal with all the wetlands and the drainage. The board approved the yield plan for 17 lots, so that's what they're aiming for. The road on the project is a cul-de-sac and is longer than the normal allowed length, and so they're requesting a waiver on that. I'm sorry, I wrote it wrong on my thing. The proposed length is, I did write it right. Proposed length for the cul-de-sac is 1,300 feet. The maximum length is 1,000 feet, so. Most of the lots that they're proposing are half-acre in size. The drainage, as I said, designs are proving to be a challenge, but they've come up with some solutions to deal with that. The Conservation Commission has suggested that the town own the open space. They will be requesting that the selectmen consider this. They have not put that to the selectmen yet. All the remaining comments have been incorporated into the report as conditions of approval. As you'll note, there are several conditions, mostly plan changes that just need to be finalized. The applicant did make a very quick final push to address several of the comments that we had. However, there still are a few remaining out there that we just incorporated into the report as conditions of approval that they would meet precedent to getting their final sign-off. The DPW does have some concern about the maintenance of the proposed drainage and detention systems, the ability of the town to handle the additional responsibility with their budget being tightened. The Piscataquag Land Conservancy has not formally agreed to accept any responsibility of taking maintenance control over the land. As I stated before, the request has not gone before the Board of Selectmen yet either, to discuss accepting it as town property. Regarding that, and I know Barbara, you brought this up to me earlier in the week, my suggestion was that a condition of approval could be imposed, stating that the appropriate approvals would need to be obtained from the Piscataquag Land Conservancy and the Board of Selectmen. And if these approvals could not be obtained, then a homeowners association and their associated covenants, conditions, and restrictions would have to be formed in order to take care of the open space property and the drainage and landscaping areas within the development, and that these documents be submitted to the town planning department and town attorney for their review and approval. So I'm gonna leave that for some discussion later. I'm sure we'll be able to get into that. Recommendation given to you in your report is that we hold the public hearing, hear the applicant's presentation, hold a public hearing, resolve any remaining issues. There are a few waivers that the applicant has requested, and those are noted in your staff report, in A through E on the first page of the report. And then the recommendation is to approve the subdivision subject to the conditions listed in the staff report and any others that the board sees fit to impose. And I'll turn the time back over to the board.
Thank you, Brian. Members of the board, do we have any immediate questions? Yes.
Brian, as part of your slide that you had, you said that there were a couple of things that had come up as the result of our last review of this, and the applicant didn't have an opportunity to get there done, so they're part of the conditions. What specifically were those, do you recall?
Well, basically, it's just the, Megan had done an extensive review on their plan and had sent me a big list of comments. That list of comments was something like 53 comments long, 54 comments maybe. That, we sent all those comments to the applicant, and they had gone through and addressed most all that they could. What couldn't be addressed at that time was basically the conditions precedent from 6 through 24 as comments on their plan or on their drainage report that just still needed to be addressed.
And
So,
am I correct, well, you've got this condition approval up here on the board, that's not on the paper copy, correct?
that is not, so that would be an additional condition that would need to be added if the board wants to do that.
Okay.
Other members of the board? Jim?
Well, I have a Barbara-like comment and then a substantive comment.
I'm gonna take that as an insult,
I
by
don't
the
know, I was
way.
about to say, I mean that in a very complimentary way.
Yeah,
You're
you're on a roll tonight.
you're beginning to convince me of many things. But it has 27 conditions just here, plus more there, some of which are pretty important. And so Barbara might say, and maybe I agree, do we want to approve a plan, even conditionally, with 28 conditions, or do we want them to come back, so we approve it? A cleaner plan. I suppose that maybe as a hypothetical, you guys can debate it. But the main one, and Megan has expressed her views, is the drainage. And I note the report says that the applicant's preference, it's in your key considerations number 3, would like to avoid a homeowners association. Yeah, and we'd like to have the town avoid taking on obligations that stretch our resources. And given those 2 considerations, I think we have an obligation to look to the town side and say that we understand your concern, applicant, but unless you can present a compelling case that it's not going to impose an excessive burden on the town, we should require a homeowners association that assumes obligations for maintenance of some of these drainage structures that are really made necessary by the difficult area that in which they're choosing to develop. And-
Bill, whoops, go ahead.
No, I'll stop there.
No, and a follow-up to that, because usually when we have the homeowner, I guess the concern that I have is approving this without even knowing where this is going as far as, is there a homeowners association or is there not a homeowners association? When we do have homeowners associations, the final documents are always reviewed by the planning board. And in this case, we wouldn't know whether there is a homeowners association, because the way this approval would be, there could be, and that would be approved by the town attorney, which is not something that we've done in the past. The board's always reviewed that after it came back. And as a matter of fact, the last one we had, Jim is the one that did make some suggested changes on that agreement.
You
And-
get what you pay for with attorneys, by the way.
Well, I understand that, but that's why we have several of them review it.
Question for Brian.
Yes, Barbara?
Obviously, the applicant knew by virtue of the comments from Megan that they hadn't had an opportunity to incorporate all of them in tonight. Was the applicant aware that the issue of holding the land and the fact that the PLC in the town hadn't actually even heard this or approved it, was the applicant aware of that before tonight?
I believe they were, but, I mean, I think
Okay.
that's a question for them to
All right,
answer.
but as far as you know, they were?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, because I'm just asking, because it does appear that there's a lot outstanding, so I'm sort of surprised it's still on the agenda, but, okay.
Any other members of the board? Megan, would you like to address just, I won't forget you. Megan, would you address the DPW comments, review comments, and how you feel about the content of what needs to be adjusted or corrected or whatever?
I had done my review, say a week ago or something, and partly the reason they haven't all been addressed, honestly, is partly my fault. The plans were given to me, I would say, a good 2 weeks before I got to it. So I finally got to it, had a longer list than I planned. You know, it was whatever, say 60 comments, but honestly, there weren't many major issues. As much as it sounds like a lot, it's not like the plan was in awful shape. I'm very nitpicky. You know, I need every construction detail to be right, you know, so there's a lot of minor things. They cranked that out in like 24 hours and got me back I had 20 comments. So they did everything they could to address them, partly due to me, you know, waiting too long. So, just so you know that's where it's at, you know, so there are still like, let's say 20 comments. They are not major comments, they're all very minor comments, you know, missing a few things, show me where the bollards are for cisterns, and, you know, I mean, just a lot of little things. My major drainage concerns, I had spoken to them with, you know, the features that are being proposed, and some of these are new features because of the new AOT rules, and we talked about that, and, so, I mean, I had some discussions with them on the phone, and we met with them, so I've been through all of that. And I'm comfortable with where the plan is at. I did tell Brian that typically this board does not like to review a plan with a lot of comments, even if they are minor. I mean, I did tell him that, but we thought that because there weren't any major issues, he'd move forward with the, you know, recommended approval, and the board could decide. So, I mean, you know, I understand that if you don't wanna go that way and you wanna wait for one more clean set of plans, that's fine. I just wanna explain that it's partly due to me not getting to it soon enough, and I think it very well could have been a even cleaner plan had I done it a little sooner. So I think, you know, that's it. The biggest issue, you know, is the maintenance thing, which, again, I don't know how you deal with that with this one site. The point is, it's just as these come up, I'm constantly sitting down with Carl, and now with these new AOT features, they're a little different than the older features. But again, they all require a good amount of maintenance, and, you know, honestly, I think DPW's behind on maintaining the ones we have. We need to get in a real formal maintenance program of these drainage features, you know, ponds and swales. And it just needs to be said on the record here, and Carl needs to talk about at the Board of Selectmen level that, you know, there's gonna come a point where we're gonna have to kind of reevaluate, and because, yeah, it does put a strain on us, you know, with the budget constraints. We are always trying to do as much in-house stuff as we can, but when we get pulled to do other in-house stuff, we get pulled away from other things like maintenance. So, you know, it's a balance, and, you know, obviously it would be great if someone else was maintaining it and not us, but I don't know how the board wants to handle that with this one subdivision. It's just something that keeps coming up, and we're gonna have to find a way to deal with that long-term.
Jim?
Well, I guess I'd like to develop a little better record on that issue through Megan, but we don't have to do it right now, but I wanna come back to that.
Okay.
Because if we're gonna use that as a established basis for imposing conditions, I think we need Megan to put some more flesh on that concern about the capacity of the town, the increase in demand beyond the normal increase caused either by the complexity of this development or the new AOT rules that, you know, we wouldn't have anticipated as we develop our town capacity. and what the alternative possibilities are to minimize that obligation of the town. And the analysis is really a scattered and premature one. If we're going to impose a condition that's different than the condition that we've done before, where the town has assumed responsibility for these improvements, we have to show some basis for treating them. We should show some basis, so we have to, some basis for treating them differently. And I think Megan has told us that, which I think we need to create a little better record for that. So we can come back and do it later, but
Okay.
gives Megan fair warning if it's coming.
Barbara?
A couple quick questions for Megan and then for Brian. In regards to the drainage maintenance agreement, this is for this new AOT rain garden type stuff, right? Are these,
There aren't rain gardens in this, but,
this is a little different, is this a little different, or is
this
this?
is slightly different. It's an infiltration basin versus a typical, detention basin that just holds the water
Right.
and releases it. The AOT rules now require a certain amount of infiltration.
Do we have, in conjunction with all the previous projects that we have, either town or private, that have created these drainage issues, do we have any drainage maintenance agreements in place that are for the same type of drainage system that's proposed in this development?
I don't know if we have an infiltration basin yet, except we have some rain garden, we have.
I know there's a
Canadian
rain garden.
You know of it like Rite Aid, but most of the private developments are the underground systems.
So we don't, so as far as you know, we don't actually have an in-place drainage maintenance agreement for an infiltration system at this
I
time?
don't believe so, no.
Okay.
The previous systems are, it was basic detention ponds, and I don't even know if, at that time we were requiring drainage maintenance, guidelines. I had just brought it up saying, if these are the new systems, it would be nice to get something from the engineer saying this is what is expected of the town to do, just as a guideline, because again, it's something we need to stay on top of and, perform those, that type of maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to take Carlos first, Jim. Carlos?
I think as a town, we need to get out of the business of maintaining drainage infrastructure. I mean, this is a major shift in AOT rules and the way that they handle it. It's no longer grass swales and simple basins. I mean, they're more sophisticated structures, and they're much more labor intensive. They need and they require maintenance. And I don't know why the town should be assuming that burden for these types of private developments. It doesn't make any sense to me, and it's going to get more and more demanding, as we move forward.
Are you suggesting there has to be some kind of homeowners association to maintain the system?
Yeah, I
To
do,
some
yes.
degree?
Yeah, I do,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. Jim, back to Jim.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to prolong this till we really come back to it, but the other component that I think we could have Megan educate us on is, you do a risk analysis on any project, what the cost is of doing things and what the risk is if you don't. So I don't have a good handle on the risk of failure if they're not maintained with these new types of erosion of drainage structures compared to the old ones, because we saw them fail all the time, and we're used to that concept.
I'd like to hear a few words from the Conservation Commission, because David's had his hand up here for, David
Thank you.
Neiman.
David Neiman, Conservation Commission. I'd like to briefly explain why the Conservation Commission was proposing that this town be taken by the land in an easement held by the PLC. Fill you in on a little bit of information on where things are with that, and then finally address a very important point that has been raised here in several ways, particularly by Mr. Raymond. First of all, the reason for doing this is, if you look at the 1997 Goffstown Master Plan, which this committee led the effort to develop, you look at the 2005, wasn't it, rewrite of that master plan, which this board led the development of and the community weighed in on, both of those clearly identify the complete lack of any kind of recreational facility in the northeastern portion of the town. Both of those master plans have said we should try to find something, we should try to come up with something for the residents in that part of town, which has been one of the fastest growing parts of town. We have an opportunity here because of the unique character of the open space that's being proposed in this development proposal. It's very large, 120 acres plus. It has been actively used by residents in the area as a hiking trail. It's absolutely beautiful land, particularly the Cordes part that hasn't been logged. If none of you have been on that, you should go see it. It's absolutely lovely. We have an opportunity to create a passive recreation area for the citizens of Goffstown as identified in our master plans by the town accepting the ownership of this easement. I understand very much the concerns of transferring expenses and commitments to the town. As a taxpayer, I don't like that either, and I'm very glad that this board is concerned with that. But please consider that, you know, there is a range and a spectrum of considerations. Drainage, I understand, is an issue, but also things like the stewardship and the monitoring. In this case, an outside professional organization, the PLC, would assume at least that aspect of the responsibility. Having it in town ownership is really the best approach to provide a recreational facility to the citizens of the town. If it belongs to a homeowners association, you know, that's up to them to decide. Most of the open space areas that have gone to homeowners associations in the past are not open to the public for recreation. So we have a real opportunity here to acquire this large parcel for the benefit of our citizens without having to go out and purchase the land. And we know how difficult that is. We know how expensive that is. I think we should take advantage of this opportunity. Now, the discussion with the selectmen, I first requested on August 25th to be put on the agenda for the selectmen's meeting. At that time, I was told by town administration that, well, they're heading into budgeting discussions. They're kind of busy right now. Are you in a big hurry? I said, no, but this is coming before planning by September 22nd. Please get me in sometime. It never happened. I finally have sent back this week, said, look, this has been slipping through the cracks. It's very important. I want to be on next Monday's selectmen's meeting. I was told today, you cannot, because the agenda has been settled and closed for next Monday, but we'll try to get you on the 25th. If it would be helpful, I would be willing to go to the open discussion session at the beginning of the meeting and at least mention it so the selectmen know it's coming up the following week. If people think that would be of benefit. But we've been trying to get on the selectmen's agenda, and I just want that to be clear. Third part of this, the PLC has not formally agreed to accept the responsibility of taking the land. This is not exactly a complete statement. There's a great deal of confusion here on the side of the PLC, which unfortunately I think is due to the fact that the executive director that was in place last year is now gone and information has slipped through the cracks. As a matter of fact, this went to the PLC a year ago. The PLC discussed this. This PLC has a committee called the Land Protection Committee, which discussed this, thought it had great merits, had multiple discussions along with the executive director, scheduled a site walk, did the site walk, wrote the report, recommended to the board of directors of the PLC that this project be accepted. Generally, the board of directors follows the Land Protection Committee's recommendations because that's the purpose of the Land Protection Committee. For reasons I cannot explain, but I assume is due to the departure of the executive director, they seem to have dropped the ball on that. So I plan on contacting members of the board to see if we can pick up the pace a little bit. The body in the PLC that makes these recommendations and approvals has already voted and recommended to do this. I think that their board of directors could act quickly and swiftly to bring this to a final resolution. I don't think it's not, I don't want anybody to think that this is something that's at the start, at the beginning, hasn't been dealt with. In fact, quite a lot of work has already been done. And that pretty much is it in a nutshell. I think that if we don't accept this recreation area, then we are ignoring something that has been part of our planning, master plans for years and years, saying that we want to do this, we need to do this. Here's an opportunity. It's fallen in our lap. I think we should take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Members of the board have any questions for either David or Megan? Continued before we open it to a public?
I have one question for
Carl.
Marion. So there's really no history of how to maintain these new filtration systems, like scheduling, maintenance, cleaning, how that goes about?
There's, well, the DES published those the new green book, the title of Pest Management Practices,
Mhm.
Stormwater Manual. And in there, they give the different examples of the types of, treatment and storage you can do.
Mhm.
And they have recommended, maintenance procedures in there, so there's some basis, you know what I mean? Say we didn't get a maintenance schedule from them. I could easily go find the maintenance of that type of system from the DES Stormwater Manual and online and just doing some research, so it's out there, it's just to get it for the exact development you're accepting would be nice. We did make some changes to the original proposed drainage layout, not knowing if this would become an HOA or publicly maintained. We changed within using the new AOT rules, things like, you used to just have your drainage go right to a detention basin. Well, now it has to be kind of pre-treated, and they don't consider the treatment swales necessarily pre-treatment, so sometimes it's gotta go to like a sedimentation basin or forebay, something like that. So instead of that, to us, that's just another thing to clean out, and to send a crew out to clean out that is more time than if we send like our vac-on truck to go clean, sumps out. So we opted for, deep sump catch basins, so that's what we did.
Okay.
Preferably, I wanted just 3-foot sumps, because we do actually have the formal maintenance program of cleaning our catch basins. It's a crew that runs year round, doing drainage and sewage, so we're definitely on top of that. So that's why I prefer to do that type of system. I wanted 3-foot sumps, it's not allowed. AOT's looking for 5 and 6-foot sumps. The rules are written that way because, in my opinion, it's more for towns that don't have the formal programs, and they have to have that kind of factor of safety, if not maintained, you've got the room for the sediment. Total overkill, in my opinion, in this town, because we are on top of it, and I talked to them about that, the engineer, and, I believe the AOT application is, under review, and when they get someone, or when they get someone assigned to that application, I had offered to go up there and sit down with that person and discuss that to see if we could get any kind of waiver, because I find it to be an extra expense for the developer to put it in, and then for us in the future to, not necessarily maintain it, but say there's ever a problem, you gotta replace it. You're just that much deeper into the water table, things like that. So, it's something I'm looking to try and work on, but, so just so you know, I mean, I was trying to adjust the different drainage features to get to a point that's the easiest possible maintenance for us, should we take it over. I mean, I would like for it to not be, but if that's how it is, I've tried to, change the design with their help, as much as we could to get it more, an easier maintainable system, I guess.
Thank you.
Since we've had the opportunity to ask some questions of our consultants, I'd like to invite the applicant to, upon hearing some of these discussions, to bring us up to speed. Good evening, Eric.
Hello. My name is Eric Mitchell. I'm here presenting this plan on behalf of Blackbriar Woods. The last time we were here in September, we continued to tonight. In the meantime, we have been to the Conservation Commission and have a recommendation that the areas of which were in the outer 50 feet of the setback, that those are approved with the condition that the pipe that we have coming out of the pond here, that be lined with round stone to provide a better passageway for amphibians and mammals, which we have done. And that's in the plans that we had submitted back to Public Works as well as to our state applications. What we've done, it's already been mentioned, but we've had comments that we've addressed with Public Works and staff. We've also had a TRC meeting. We've submitted those. We did turn around and get those back to the town so they can put in your package for last Friday. Since that time, There has been one other review, and those are the conditions that you have in here relative to what staff and Public Works wants to see. Although there may be a large number, counting them one by one, we have already gone down to the list. We made the changes to our plan. Had not submitted that back to Public Works because it was just done yesterday, and it wouldn't be available for tonight's meeting. Plus, we want to have the state come back and look at the application, because we may have some other changes. Point being that although there may be a lot of comments that came back from Public Works that still need to be addressed, we already have addressed those. That has to be confirmed by Public Works. It's the case, but they're not. There's no deal breakers. There's things that we need to add to the plan, and we have done so, and we think that'll pass muster once Public Works has the chance to look at that. In terms of the disposition of the open space, we believe that it is possible to have that as a condition of approval, that this be taken over by the Piscataqua Land Conservancy for the easement and the land by the selectmen. That's how we've approached this from day one, knowing what sort of resource is there and available. The information that needs to be taken care of is the actual easement itself, and that information, I think that if the review of department as well as the town attorney on that, I think that still can be handled as a condition of approval for that as well. As far as the maintenance, long-term maintenance, we have talked about it at some other meetings here. It is something that is primarily driven by the new AOT rules. But that is something that's going to happen in the future, and I think that's why Public Works is bringing it up, because it's something that's not going to go away. It isn't as site-specific as one might think. In this particular case, we have what would amount to 2 detention basins. One is infiltrating and holding back some water, and the other is just holding back the water. We may have gotten away with only one of those basins prior to the AO2 rule change. That change took effect in the beginning of 2009, and I don't know, but this may be the first application that has come before you with the rule changes. There are a lot of different things that can be done that are mechanical, require a lot of maintenance, and those are pretty much relegated to commercial sites where someone is there all the time doing those maintenance. It's not a public site or a public road. In this particular case, as Megan had indicated, we did have a 4-bay area here, which is a holding area to clean up the storm water before it goes into the basin in the back. At their suggestion, we did increase the sumps so they wouldn't have to maintain the 4-bay at all. And she's already talked about the depth of the sumps, and now that might be a little bit excessive, but that is one way that we were able to do that. This project does not have any mechanical features that have to be maintained. We have done a project in the Woodland Village site plan for multifamily. There we had underground treatment, infiltration, as well as pre-treatment through mechanical means. That's all the private development, and that's all the maintenance there is taken care of by the development itself. This does not have that. What it really does have, though, is twice the amount of area that we're holding water back in. And if nothing else, that requires twice the amount of maintenance. The amount of maintenance is dependent on how the site is taken care of while it's being developed, how it's established before construction, and how it's left after construction. I realize that there's a component for Public Works besides, plowing the roads and sanding and all that on the roads. The drainage system, maybe it's twice as much as what it used to be. But it's not because of the site itself. It's not because of the design that we elected to do that's more elaborate. And I think all towns are working with this. Unfortunately, there's a lot of towns that don't know about it because there's not a lot going on in some of those towns. I think that it would be fair at this point to consider the application we have the way it is, and that the town should work on a procedure going forward. Maybe there's gonna end up being some sort of impact fee per development that'll be assessed because of drainage. City of Manchester, I believe, is trying to get a stormwater utility through the Public Utilities Commission. So they have their Manchester Water Works, and they're gonna have a stormwater utility, so they can go anywhere in town and regulate that. There may be outside sources that are gonna come in, and utility companies that are gonna maintain under contract with the town. But I think at this point in time, for us, for the one project that we're doing, to require us to do that, I think is, I don't consider that to be the right thing to do. And with everything that's been said, I think that we are in a position where we can meet the conditions of approval, and would like the board to consider a conditional approval tonight.
Members of the board, do we have any questions of Mr. Mitchell? That doesn't prevent you from asking a question later on, though.
Well,
Barbara?
I mean, in regards to this condition of approval, I mean, Phil can say what the Board of Selectmen are. Where is, as far as you know, the PLC in regards to this? Do you know?
As was, based on emails discussions today, they're still waiting to give it to their land division, even though David has indicated that's already been done.
Right.
But that formality has to be there. They said that, if I remember the dates correctly, that's something they're gonna try to do to get to them and get back to the full board at the earliest, probably in the beginning of November. We're not, as the applicant, we're proponents of having them take it. We're not shopping around to see who can take it and who
Right.
can't. This is the condition upon which we want to give it, because we think it's the most beneficial to the open space, to both have the town own it and Piscataqua to do it, and there is a component of maintenance, a fee that has to be paid to Piscataqua by the applicant so they can have perpetual maintenance on it. We think this is the right thing to do, and that's why we're not concerned about having that a condition of approval.
Okay. Thank you.
Carl?
Eric, I just had a question with regards to your state approvals. Where are they right now pending wise?
The subdivision has been submitted, AOT has been up there for 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know if it's been assigned yet. Wetlands has been either submitted in the last day or so, or will be tomorrow. That is, Shower's office is submitting that, and they have all the information on it. We are, or have submitted copies from the AOT original application, who had plans before we changed them for the comments of the town, so we're gonna dovetail those back in and substitute those. So there's, everything that the town has looked at is what AOT is gonna be looking at.
Okay.
But it's been about 3 to 4 weeks at AOT.
Any other members of the board? Yes, Megan?
There's just one thing I had noticed before I came tonight that I wanted to bring up relating to waivers. You have the waivers listed, and one waiver, I'm not sure if it needs to be requested or not, is that the well radii overlap the drainage easement areas in 2 spots.
Right, it's on the plan.
So our rules do not allow that. Typically, it's something I would say, not allowed, no waiver, you know, I usually am really against that. It happens to overlap in the 2 spots where there's incoming treatment swales to pick up water, where I had asked those features to be removed, but it's the AOT rules that are forcing them to be there. What's happening is it's two different lots in 2 different spots where water could naturally just sheet off and flow down to low areas, okay? But instead of doing that, the AOT rules, and correct me if I'm wrong, require a certain amount of infiltration. So there's small little grass swales beside 2 lots, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, where the lots are sheeting, the water's getting picked up and brought to the treatment units. So I had requested those features to be removed so it could just sheet flow naturally, because there's a couple 100 feet, I think. But I was told that they're trying to meet the number of infiltration or something like that, so they're there. So the point of not having an overlapping flow radius on a drainage easement is that the town doesn't want to get into the whole salt contamination issues and things like that. Where it would matter is if you have a well radius overlapping, say, an outlet pipe easement, you know what I mean? then you have outlet water that could potentially have salt contamination in it. In this case, it's overlapping two grass swales where it's just water right off of a lot, has nothing to do with the road. So I don't see it as an issue, but I still think you might need to request a waiver for that, so I'm just bringing it up. I just noticed it tonight because I chatted with Mike Dirigo before I came here, and we were just looking at everything, and we brought up together, we were talking about the whole overlapping well radiuses, and, you know, we felt strongly that those weren't supposed to overlap, but we looked back at the meeting minutes and talked about it, and so that's really the comment that came out of it as well. There's two spots that's overlapping and doing easements, so that just may need to be addressed somehow, whether they have to request it or however you wanna do it, I just wanted to bring that up.
That is a requirement to do that, and I trust that it is, that we would, you know, ask that also to be a consideration as a waiver. I think one of the areas that she's talking about is in this area, right after we cross the brook, start going back uphill. These two lots have runoff that goes down this way. There's no road runoff going in, but we have to we have to treat this water coming off of the lot. Before, we think water just used to go, but this area here has to be treated, and we have a well on this lot with a radius that would go into that area. But as Megan had indicated, it's not the same as the well going into the road, where there's road salt, or where there's an outlet to a pipe taking water away from the road or roadside ditch, which might have some salt in it.
It's that spot too, so there's three now.
What's that?
There's three. It's, off of lot 2 to the little grass swale, off of lot 3 to the infiltration basin, and off of lot 12 to the grass swale. So when you look at the main huge pipe that goes, you know, connects the wetlands, the lot to the right, the lot to the left, and then you go to the end of the cul-de-sac and the lot closest to the drainage access road out to the detention pond, that well is out back and connects to that. So there's three spots there. Yeah, sorry, so lots 12, 2, and 3. They overlap the drainage easement areas. I just don't want in any way think that we're setting a precedent of allowing that, because I'm usually, you know, pretty hard on moving those. But again, these are new features, they're there only to collect the water and, you know, make those numbers work, and I don't see a concern with any contamination in that kind of case, and someone can add if they want from the board, if they disagree with that, but I'm trying to play devil's advocate and look at both sides and, you know, look at the purpose of our rules and, you know, do they apply in this case?
Thank you.
Chairman, just to explain on this one here as well. The house is here and it goes downhill towards the brook, and we can no longer let the water run off, even though part of it's through an area that has been, would not be disturbed. We have to collect that and get it into the system. We can't, normally we just let it go, but we can't let it go and have the numbers, get the numbers to work. So that's another area where the runoff is only coming from the person's lot itself. So well radii going into that is not water coming from the public road at all.
Okay. I'd like to give thank you, Eric. The public hearing was continued from our last meeting, and I'd like to avail the public a comment, an opportunity to speak in reference to this project. Is there anybody here wishing to speak in reference to this particular proposed project? David?
I just want to answer a question that Barbara had asked. The LPC committee voted on January 11th, 2010 to recommend this project to the board of directors. It's in the minutes of the January meeting of the LPC committee. So if there's an electronic record, it's in writing, it's there.
Okay, thank you. There is nobody from the public wishing to speak in reference to this project. Not wanting to close the public hearing if this doesn't move forward this evening. I'd like to hear from members of the board in terms of preference and how to deal with this particular project. Anybody wish to speak first, or I'll go around the room? Jim?
I have a, well, I have a question on a specific issue. It's the waiver of the length of the road. I understand that, why the applicant wants that, but is there any basis here for granting the waiver and denying it on the next applicant? Why would we do that here?
Would it be because of the size of the lot and the concerns about preserving the open space? Brian?
I know one concern is on length of cul-de-sacs, just fire access. And so, in this case, they've located a cistern, somewhat in the middle of the project. So, you know, once the fire truck comes in, they can access it and then access any of the projects using that cistern. So, that being said, it sort of takes away the need for, you know, a shorter cul-de-sac or, you know, needing to be able to access fire facilities from the exterior on the main road or something like that.
It's at about station 700, which is about right in the middle. Jim?
Did the fire department have comments on that, or were they satisfied with the?
Yes, they were satisfied. We had done a TRC meeting with them prior to writing up the report and everything, and they had given the guidance on how big the cistern needed to be and everything. So.
And if I recall, that's really the driving issue on cul-de-sac length is emergency access. Do we have other concerns, or?
I don't specifically remember the board discussing any other particular concerns other than
As to the cul-de-sac?
on cul-de-sacs, yes. Lowell?
Yeah, I think one other, you know, factor there too is, as far as cul-de-sacs go, is that we have typically encouraged, you know, connections, you know, through to another road. And, you know, having that cul-de-sac limit, I think I said, you know, if you're gonna go further than that, we really want you to connect to another road. But, you know, another factor in this case, I think, too, is just, like somebody had said, you know, like the size of the open space not being made available to the town, I think, is also a mitigating factor there.
Okay. Any other members of the board?
And follow up to that, Brian, could you just go back through the waivers again in regards to the requests and why we should grant them?
If I might, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Brian can read them. I think on the latest go-around, I think the length of cul-de-sac is the only waiver that we had on the plan. I think the other ones relative to vertical curves and other things have been taken care of. Megan can chime in, but I think we changed those from, initially those were on the original designs and required. I don't think they're required now.
Oh, okay.
Only length of cul-de-sac and what Megan has brought up about the
The well rating?
well radii.
So the speed limit reduction to 25 is,
We have not asked for that.
okay.
There's just two waivers.
Yes.
Megan?
I was just gonna state that in our rules now, we have a new column for roadway design standards, which is low-volume roadways. Which is typically dead-end cul-de-sac roads that have no potential for future connection, and that's how this falls. So they're, you know, the roadway design, the K values, things like that, as long as they meet the AASHTO low-volume road rules, then we allow that, and that's why we've added that in here. It was something that started happening, and during one of our revisions of the planning board development regulations, we added that so that we could reference the low volume rules. So if they didn't fall under the main local and they fell under low volume, it was still okay. So I don't think a waiver is required for any of those first three, or even 8, the K value. Because again, if you look, like, I'm looking, if I have the right version, page 42, you know, the K factor has, like, you know, 5 stars, and then the note down below says the minimum per ASHTO low volume. So as long as they meet the minimum per ASHTO low volume, then they're okay.
Okay.
At least that's how I interpret these.
That's fine, that's what we ask you to do. Other members of the board wishing to comment, ask a question?
Well, I'd like to just make a comment while public hearing is open, and I'm not sure that it's material, because the applicant has agreed to it as a condition. There may be some technical correct statements in what David say, but the PLC, Land Protection Committee, is meeting again on this project on Monday, and it's anticipated that it would be at least a few months before it wound its way from conditional approval to final approval, because the PLC board requires all of the documents to be done before they approve it, which would mean it would have to be worked out between PLC and the town. And I know there haven't been any discussions between PLC and the town, so I'm not saying that what David said is incorrect, but the thought that this is going to be approved by PLC even at their next meeting is not, it's not going to happen. But I think the applicant has sort of said they're willing to work with it anyways, but the board should just be aware of that. And I wanted to say that during public comment. And I don't know what the town anticipates it will be to address it, because I do know how the agendas are this time of year for the Board of Selectmen. My other comment is, I do think that we approved a project which was a private development on Bog Road that provided for public access. And that was part of the docs, actually, that we had to approve in conjunction with an extension request, that the applicant actually got those all done when they came in for the extension request. But I'm pretty sure that's private, was the private development that allowed public access on walking trails and other things. So it has been done.
So as far as the open space, who's gonna hold the paper?
It still has not been
It still hasn't
determined.
been, well, what's the PLC's position on the whole thing, David? I'm just not clear on it.
As I understand it from presentation, it's been to committee, it's been approved by committee, but not been approved by, I'll call it the leadership, or people in leadership roles at the PLC. Does that make sense?
What's been approved? Ownership of the parcel or the easement over the parcel?
The parcel ends up getting owned. The plan is, at this time, that the town would own the property.
Okay.
And then the conveyance would be of the easement to
Right.
PLC, to management, which is why there's talk about the donation to PLC for the maintenance in perpetuity, which is part of what PLC will have to address.
Okay,
But
so-
it goes to the, as David said, it goes to the town, and the
Okay.
easement goes to
Just to make
PLC, and
sure.
PLC has to negotiate with the town
Yeah, I
what the
understand.
terms of
Yeah,
that are.
yeah. Thank you.
David, would you like to correct anything there?
Just one other observation on that. Well, historically, the PLC does not want to enter into an easement when the property is held by a homeowners association, correct?
Correct, and they will not, they probably will not.
That's another reason why we would want it to be held by the town. But the bigger issue is, because if it's held by the town, it can now be made available publicly without any conflict with the homeowners association. And that's much cleaner, much simpler. You know, otherwise you're faced with questions down the road from homeowners saying, well, why am I assessed? And it wouldn't be much, but they would say, why am I being assessed property tax on some proportional representation of this open space when in fact it's made available as a public resource to the town? It would be a fair question. I mean, we've seen this time after time. We approve roads, for example, that, well, yeah, we're gonna hold those privately, but a few years down the road, they come back to the town. The same sort of thing is gonna end up happening here. But I just wanna make that clear, and I also wanna make clear that in an email that I saw today, there was, I'm sorry to say it, but there was misinformation, misunderstanding within the PLC. The individuals corresponding were not aware that the Land Protection Committee has already considered this, already voted, already already made the approval, which is in the January 10th minutes. And,
get into it.
again, that's documentation that we can come up with and show you.
Okay. Well, since it's not here, we really can't do anything with it, David, unfortunately, I suppose. It's a good thing to know, and it's a good thing to work towards, but
Right.
I think that's what it is right now.
The only point I'm trying to make is we're nobody's starting from ground zero here, which is
Okay.
some of the information I saw today was suggesting that this is being taken up for the first time at the next Land Protection Committee meeting. In fact, that was how it was proposed on the agenda for that meeting, and that's entirely false. It was already voted on 10 months
Okay.
ago.
All right. I'm gonna just ask the public if there's anybody out there wishing to speak in reference to this project, because I'm gonna ask the board if we do desire to close the public hearing.
Well-
And whether we feel that there's a need to carry this forward. Jim?
Well, if we close our public hearing, then we've closed out Mr. Mitchell, and because if he can speak, then so can the public, even though it's sort of theoretical, given the vast multitude that's attending. But if we think we're gonna go back to him with questions, we should keep it open. It doesn't mean we can't deliberate while we're still in public session. But
Okay.
don't close it too early.
Well, I didn't want to, that's where I was going with it. Because I think there's some discussion probably still has to transpire on some of these issues. Carl?
It's my understanding that if the PLC is involved and a homeowners association is discussed and implemented, the PLC would not want to take over this.
It depends on the responsibilities of the homeowners association. The homeowners association, if we're required to be one formed, may have specific duties, I suspect, that we impose upon them to do, such as the maintenance of the drainage systems. That could be a specific task, and it may require that they form a homeowners association. It has nothing to do with the administration of the open space. I would have thought that we could do something like that. Jim?
But where are the areas where the maintenance would have to occur? Are they in the open space that, as opposed, are gonna be owned by town and PLC, or are they in the,
Some of it's in the open space, so there had to be an easement, because you got those structures that are outside and in the open space. Where? Eric, can I correct me if I'm wrong?
No, that's true. Primarily, the areas that would have maintenance in the future are all in easements, but on the open space. It's this pond here and this one here. They're not on private property, but, going along with that, any swales along the road or something technically are part of what the maintenance is, so they may be, nearby the houses. But the ponds and the swales are all on the open space, and easements are shown. It may be moot if the town is the one taking ownership, but we plan to have those, we have set those aside as easements on these dashed lines that we have right here.
Just going around the room, Lowell, do you have any observations, comments?
Not anything further than what I already
Okay.
said.
Steve?
I don't have anything new that hasn't been brought up.
Bill?
Well, I would reiterate that I have a concern about approving this with the condition of having an attorney's draw up homeowners' documents that this board doesn't see. You talk about, I can't represent, I can't state a position for the board for something that has not come in front of the board and had a discussion on. The only I can tell you is part of the reason why David could not get on the agenda is because the selectmen have been discussing 10% budget cuts to all the departments. I mean, those are some of the things that we're looking at. We're looking at when Public Works came in. We're looking at possible layoffs. So that, only thing I can say is adding more work or requirements to Public Works when we're looking at layoffs and budget cuts, and quite frankly,
after the news that's come out today and what's happened to all the stocks of the bank stocks, the housing market for the next 2 or 3 years is not looking as good as it did look, and unfortunately, that's where the town gets most of its revenue from, indirectly from homes, through taxpayers, through homeowners.
Carol?
I would agree with Phil. I'm just uncomfortable with this. It's just kind of like floating out there, and there's no solid things to look at, to see, if there is an agreement or some type of association put together, what actually are they gonna have in writing?
Could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
If the board decides to go with this condition, they could also put a condition that a compliance hearing be done in order to review the homeowners association documents or the approvals from the town or what have you. Just a suggestion.
What kind, and how do you see that playing out from a time frame? Just in follow-up for that? I mean, you just make that a requirement, or you say we want it, it's a conditional approval for 4 months,
You could
2
say 4 to
months?
6 months maybe, and that
months.
probably would give it enough time to pan out whatever issues are remaining. I'm not sure, maybe Mr. Mitchell has a better idea on what time frame that would be, but, I mean, you could do it any time in that 1-year period of, when it gets approved to when it has to get a final approval, and, state that maybe by such and such date, you shall have a public, compliance hearing, but it doesn't have to be on a specific date or something like that.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes.
may, that's something that would be acceptable. I mean, it's the same as in even part of this motion, come back to have the documents submitted to town planning, reviewed by the town attorney. We don't have a problem coming back for a compliance hearing on the documentation when it's ready. If we're willing to accept when it's done, then we can move ahead. No plans will be signed until it's done. We certainly don't have a problem with the board's input in doing that. What we would like to do is reach a milestone to the extent where the plans and the planning process, that part of it, if it's set and done, it can be done conditionally, we'd like to do that, because there's other obligations of the applicant from a financial standpoint, and the things that need to get done and moved along. We do not want to have this put off for 2 months for the documentation with everything still sitting, on the table. So a conditional approval would give a milestone, that you still can't build it, you can't go out there, and one of the conditions is to come back to you with the legal agreements and have concurrence between the town attorney, staff, and selectmen, as well as Conservation Commission if they want to weigh in.
You're thinking carefully over there, Jim.
No, you can put on a face, it means nothing. The issue, and what, that proposal's fine, we've done that before, because frankly, the homeowners' documents are not rocket science. Even a lawyer could come up with them, but it's that issue in that last paragraph on the maintenance, and drainage, I still haven't tacked down. Our choices are, as I've heard them, is town acquires and assumes all obligations of maintenance. On the other spectrum is town doesn't acquire and they remain a homeowners association. But in that case, we have a choice of homeowners association assumes obligations of drainage structures or not. Do the town take over them when they take the roads? In the middle is the option that the town and PLC acquire the fee and the conservation easement interest, but we still impose a maintenance obligation on what will have to be a homeowners association on drainage structures. But the practical issue is how do you distinguish between that maintenance obligation and the maintenance obligation generally of the roads? are they sufficiently segregated so we could say, town will maintain the roads if the town accepts it, but homeowners association has to maintain drainage structures. Are they separable?
Well, I think in this instance, we don't know exactly what that procedure is. So it's difficult to be able to formulate that program. So I would assume if that's a direction the board wants to take, then we have to give some time to the Department, Public Works, to try to formulate some kind of a specific program with this proposed project that meets some standards of acceptability for the Department of Public Works. Does that sound about right? That somebody has to be the reviewing and delineate the responsibility and then come back to us and say, we're willing to accept this project with this limitation on a maintenance agreement. Jim?
Well, sure, and the alternative, if, as Mr. Mitchell says, the applicant is willing to proceed, is we could approve this with a condition that the homeowners association will assume responsibility, but give them the opportunity to come back after conferring with Megan. I haven't worked on the wording. And once we know where this ownership's gonna be on an alternate method, I mean, as I hear Mr. Mitchell, and maybe I'm wrong, he at least wants approval on the plan. Now we're getting to, stuff on the far end, and I'd like to find some way to do that so we don't have to keep coming back and revisiting the plans.
Okay. Carlos, do you have a comment?
I'm just trying to struggle in my mind with this concept of having certain portions of the drainage features within the open space easement area, and why we need to get into that sort of a mess. Certainly the easement can be written with conditions that allow it to be there, but it just gets messy, and why can't we reconfigure the open space so that these basins are not in the open space? Why aren't we just reconfiguring it and making it clean? Instead of, complicating what's gonna be, what could be a fairly straightforward easement that's now gonna have to have some conditions relative to these.
Does that mean it becomes part of a lot? Or does it become part of the, a segment that is a lot but is open space and owned by the homeowners association?
That's why it's like that, because they don't want to form a homeowners association.
Well,
So they don't want common land.
That's
Right.
neither here nor there. Barbara?
I don't care.
Any initial comments?
Well, my other comment is,
Yep.
I agree with Phil. We need to get out of the business of maintaining private development drainage infrastructure. They're getting more complicated. It's gonna be more costly. There's no reason why a private developer who's turning a profit should thrust that responsibility onto the back of the taxpayers of this town. It's not necessary. I don't know why we would do that. I think we need to develop some sort of a program where there are performance standards. We can say, and this is not against Megan or the DPW, we can say we're on top of our catch baits and cleaning, and we're all good with that. Yeah, until we start making cuts, budget cuts. Then what's gonna happen? Maybe we aren't gonna be able to do that. So maybe now's the time to start looking at this from a little bit different perspective. And again, I don't think we ought to be in that business, and I think we ought to make the developer responsible for setting up an inspection and a maintenance program for those drainage systems, and be responsible for it. And if we're gonna invest town resources and the time of our town staff, those resources ought to be directed towards making sure that they adhere to the performance standards. They inspect when they're supposed to, they maintain when they're supposed to, they submit reports when they're supposed to. I think that's where we ought to be putting our town resources.
Eric?
I understand the position that the town is in because there's more maintenance involved in projects as we go forward. But in this particular case, this project was, part of the property was purchased, the rest of it's under agreement based on the rules and regulations that are in place at the time it was done. And public roads are allowed, and this is a public road. And any drainage associated with public roads is public, and that's why it's in the form of an easement, so the town would have a right to maintain it. And it's clear that we don't want a homeowners association, because we think it just gets messy. Maybe not the first day, but down the road, it just isn't, it's easier if it's a public road, that if the homeowners association doesn't have, and it's also easier if the town maintains the infrastructure that's there. I understand that it's more maintenance than what they planned before, but as a solution, because it's gonna continue to happen as you move forward, that maybe there's an impact fee that gets paid. Just as if you had a school problem and you were having a school impact fee based on the number of lots, they have to pay that fee. But there has to be some sort of rational basis to determine how much an applicant has to pay. And unfortunately, at this point, none of that's been set, and I'm not sure that this project should be the guinea pig, because it's like an ordinance change for fees, and that's something that should be considered in a special section of your zoning or subdivision regulations, not applied to this project. Not that I'm unsympathetic about the town's concerns about maintenance, but if there was only one pond, we could still have the same discussion about this, because it's still something the town has to maintain. Our plans initially met all the town requirements that were in your regulations and your rules. It's the additional AOT, which has required more maintenance, not the developer itself. But I would just like to request that the board take this under consideration for future ordinance review.
There was a gentleman in the audience had his arm up. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Keith Martell. I'm here on behalf of Blackbriar Woods and Sterling Homes. We own the project. I'd like to kind of further Member Raymond's comments and kind of establish our position on the drainage issue in the homeowners association. Our concern as we go forward with a project like this, or our thought train when we go forward, is that the new AOT rules are certainly designed to make projects more environmentally friendly, to provide greater protection and greater treatment for our stormwater runoff. What we found in the past, and certainly this board and this town must have some experience with improvements that are approved as private improvements that at some point in the future have been asked to become public because they haven't had the necessary funds to do it. We're talking about a neighborhood of small starter single-family homes in the $200,000 to $250,000 range. We're not talking about mansions with buyers that have expendable funds going forward with it. To put the burden of maintenance going forward for a town road's drainage onto a small association, small being 17 lots in it, not 70 lots in it, my thought and my concern is that in the future you would find that that burden provides excessive for the neighborhood itself to maintain, and failure, I believe, would actually go against and be counterproductive to the measures that we've taken to try to ensure the environmental sensitivity to the open space. Megan had expressed some concern with well radiuses and arguments that we see pop up all the time of salt contaminating wells, things like that. If a town is protective enough to be conscious of their salt and the contamination that it can provide into a well, I can't imagine the arguments that would exist if there was problems that came from town maintenance on a town road with a private homeowners association trying to maintain the drainage structures there to support the maintenance that they're doing. I see the argument of, geez, you put too much sand, I have to pump these too often. I believe that your course of action, I do support, and I see it in other towns, that there does need, with changing state regulations, there does need to be some different way for towns to adhere to it. I just, with all due respect, don't feel that the path of having a private homeowners association of 17 lots responsible for maintaining the drainage of a road that Megan maintains is the best blend coming forward into the future.
Thank you. Members of the board. Lowell.
The concept of an impact fee to cover that kind of expense, I'd like to clarify something about how that doesn't work, because as I understand the impact fee ordinance, that can only be for capital expenditures, not for maintenance.
That's my understanding, which is why there's been such discussion in the past on the floor.
Yeah. I think we've had that discussion in numerous cases where we've modified the impact fees since I've been a member of the board too, and it's been a...
Right, but the underlying concept
Yes.
of it being for capital expenses
Correct.
has not changed.
Correct. Jim?
There are ways of skinning that cat without calling it an impact fee, where the applicant agrees to avoid some other event that they might contribute money for something, a fund. But my question is for Megan, of we heard discussion about the road drainage, but when I heard Mr. Mitchell earlier describing the drainage, I'll call them drainage structures that were required not to drain from the road, but to drain water that otherwise would sheet flow from the lots. This was in relation to the well radius waiver, but it appears that some amount of this water that's being put into this drainage system is not from the road, but rather from the lots now required in the, can you quantify that? Because that is not the town's obligation to provide for. We have an obligation, if we assume ownership of a road, in theory, in the past, to deal with the road drainage, but not drainage off private lots. Now, I'm hearing that being pushed onto the town here.
I didn't think of it that way, but I mean, you're right, and the water, it goes to that well radius issue. There is water that's being collected, pushed into the town's, the public system, and then into those infiltration basins that would have naturally just sheet flowed off. It's because of the new AOT rules, so it's not water off the road in some of the spots, in those 3 spots that we talked about. It's not water sheeting off the road just to the town system. And that's why I had brought it up as a question, saying I find these features, you know, unnecessary and excessive, and talked that through with them, but unfortunately it sounds like the AOT rules don't really give us any room with that, you know, and I offered to go up and sit down with them, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to do anything about that. The rules are set, and unfortunately we're stuck with them. But you're right, we're capturing more water than we really need to. But, well, then I think we need to, but state is saying we need to collect it and infiltrate it, so.
Well, they're saying that the developer needs to. Right?
Because of the impervious area your development creates. It's some kind, I don't know the formula for it, but your development creates a certain amount of impervious area, and based on that amount of increased runoff because of the new impervious area, you have to now collect as much as you can to meet a certain percentage requirement of what you infiltrate. So the less impervious area you have, then the less that you need to infiltrate and therefore potentially collect, I guess. I don't know if it's that simple, but.
Eric?
And I know it looks like it's private stormwater that goes into a public area, and that has to be maintained. I think that's your point. But specifically it's a point source, but it's no different than any lot that is uphill of the road, and the drainage of the lot goes into a ditch, and that gets collected. It's all part of the same.
Happens all the time, all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Everywhere in town.
The catch basins need to be designed with those little sub-catchments to, you know, deal with that contribution.
Not wishing to prolong this event. Barbara?
You know, I'm sure from Mr. Mitchell and the applicant's perspective, and even people looking at minutes of the LPC committee, this has gone on, but the plan that we had the end of last year, that was seen by some people on a preliminary basis, has changed since the beginning of the year. There used to be a through road, the lot number is different, we've had a new yield plan this year. I don't have a particular problem with the plan, but the applicant sort of chose to proceed this way to a certain extent, and the size of the lot, by virtue of our regs, creates certain requirements. But it's ultimately the applicant's decision as to how to proceed, what size lots, and what homes they want to develop. I don't like this, I don't like the long road into the drainage easement. I'm very appreciative of the town's concerns on the maintenance issues, and I think that it is a huge quagmire that you're running into with easements, the town, and the PLC. And I'm wondering if, since I think the applicant wants some sort of approval so they can find out, I'm assuming if they can get further agreements or financing to go forward, that if after this conditional approval and the Board of Selectmen, there was something inserted that said to specifically include, to address the issue of responsibility for maintenance of all drainage, swales or features, and access road. Because, Mr. Mitchell has a point, that's, he's hearing this new, it's AOT. Well, AOT's here, we have to meet with it, but I'm hearing Selectman Stevanz's concerns about the budget and assuming this. I don't think the town wants to assume responsibility for this. And I know that the words rain tax have been uttered in this building, which is not gonna happen, but it's being uttered in a lot of towns to deal with this issue. And I don't know whether that solves the issue, because I'm just suggesting it, if the applicant is willing to have to come back in a few months, whether that moves it enough for his purposes and provides us with enough assurance that the issue is gonna be dealt with. And even though I am loath to address anything with this number of conditions, the fact I'm even discussing anything proceeding on this is based on the representation made by Megan that conditions 6 through 24 are procedural agreed-to aspects that didn't make the plan tonight. Okay. But I don't know, I'm sure maybe Jim can speak whether he thinks that addresses the issue or not.
Well, I'd like to just go back one issue in terms of drainage structures being outside of in the open space that Collis brought up, and how the board feels about how you might deal with that circumstance, both today and in the future.
I mean, because the other issue that raises is that if this is open to the public, and I point out that we do have a private development that allows public access under our approval, is arguably members of the public now have access to the drainage easement and drainage structures that the town is now responsible to maintain. And,
It's unnecessarily messy.
yeah, it's getting pretty messy.
Do you believe these are issues that can be solved this evening, or does it need further consideration? And do we allow the applicant the opportunity to formalize, given some direction of where we want to go with this, the documents to substantiate that's how it will happen? Because that's what I'm hearing from several of the board members, that we have to be specific about what we want. If we want an agreement with the Piscataqua Watershed Group, PLC, then it's like everything else. We could be here for a year and a half while that happens, and I'm not, for one, want to wait a year and a half. If it's already in the works, far be it for me to determine that, but I would encourage them to pursue it faster and quicker before we lose interest, so to speak. If we want to tell them that these drainage structures have to be within the confines of and operated under a homeowners association, we need to tell them that. And we can make that by decision without voting on any final approval, I believe.
I think our regs are pretty clear when it comes to who's gonna maintain the drain. I mean, the Appendix C talks about it, and says any drainage structures must be readily accessible by town forces, or an association must be formed to provide for private maintenance of the drainage facilities. There's two options available to us under the development regs.
Okay? So, then we choose A or B. Okay? But that doesn't address the issue of the location and
I understand, yeah.
the cross easements and whatever, all that kind of craziness that has to take place. Is the Piscataqua group willing to accept something that has easements with drainage structures on it, that is maintained by somebody else? Is that getting a little complicated? Jim?
Well, I don't, from a property ownership, it is not, because they'll take, typical conservation trust will accept conservation easements that have, subject to certain reserved rights to go on and do certain things.
Okay.
So it's not, not a foreign concept, as long as it's clear they're not assuming liability. So it's easements
Yeah.
with a subject to a certain activity within a certain defined area. Shouldn't bother them.
And I'll ask,
Very imaginative.
and I'll ask Megan a question. If the board's decision was to recommend some type of maintenance agreement under some guidelines, how long would it take to develop that for this specific project?
Maintenance agreement between who? Just a written, like, this is what the town has to do?
This is what is willing to be accepted by the Department of Public Works and the town as the category and the level of maintenance for the drainage systems and the drainage structures in this project.
A recommended maintenance schedule has already been laid out as part of their AOT permit package, I believe. So it's already been written on what has to be done, by who doesn't say. But I mean, whether it's the town, I believe that's how, I don't know if it says right in, if that's how it's being proposed, but if it's a homeowners association, it's the same maintenance package information that goes to a homeowners association versus the town. It's already been laid out as far as I know. I thought that was in the AOT, because I had requested that, and I think it was part of that.
Is that correct, Eric? Okay, thank you.
I just, can I
Yes.
just ask, I wanted to mention, you know, one of the concerns sounds like, you know, these ponds being pushed way out back into the open space. And just to let you know, there were several revisions of what came through, okay? And there was a detention pond, or whatever you wanna call it, right, up front near the road, and it was in front of the home. And I know we've been through, at least, I'm trying to give them direction, and if I give them the wrong direction, I apologize, but I've been here through some subdivisions where we did that, and the board was totally against putting this, like, out in front of a property. And so I said, look, put it out back, and they said, well, it's gonna be a really long road. I'm like, I don't think it matters, the board does not like these up in front, you know, nobody's gonna wanna buy a home with a giant detention pond in their front yard. So I did direct them to push it out back. There are ways to break it up and put it on the homes, and I can tell you DPW is 100% against that. That is the Lally Lesnick subdivision of 7 little bioretention rain gardens on each and every lot. That's how you can break it up in little pieces, and it's on each person's home. And, you know, our opinion is we're totally against that, because then who is maintaining that? That is a very high level of maintenance for either the DPW, or you're relying on homeowners to maintain each of their individual things, and I think the potential for failure is much greater when you're relying on every single person to maintain their individual features. So, you know, there's positives and negatives to everything, and I know we don't like this being big and a long road and out in the open space, but I've worked with them to get it to this point, because just in case it ever gets turned over to the town, even if you decide it goes to an HOA, I've seen things happen where it ends up being in the town's possession anyway as maintenance. You know, there are some, you know, that has happened. So I have to look at this as if it's gonna become ours someday. Even if they came to us and said, this is a private road, I would still make every comment I made. You know, there may be some differences, but the point is, I still look at it as if it's gonna be a public road someday, because that's the reality. So, just to let you know why it's gotten to some of this, I feel like we've kind of pushed them in that direction.
Lowell.
There's another alternative, you don't, and we, like you say, we traditionally haven't favored, you know, structures like that in front of a house. But an alternative, rather than putting it behind the house, is put it in place of the house, in place of that lot. That can be done, and then it wouldn't have to be as long.
Yeah, it's the length. Mr. Chair.
Yes.
You separate the design features from however long it is or where it's located, who's responsible, and I'm just dealing with the latter. I mean, I've heard nothing that tells me this isn't a good plan, it's just the obligation to maintain. I'm sort of hesitant to go back and redraw lines if we don't have to, but the question is, I think the question before us right now is, does the town assume responsibility, or does we impose that on the homeowners association for maintenance of the drainage structures under the regs that Hollis recited to us? I think that's the only issue we're struggling with right now, isn't it? And I haven't heard a compelling, I've heard the applicant's why their preference, but I still haven't heard a compelling case why we should assume that obligation, particularly if it can be done separate from the road itself, and the regs certainly suggest that was the intention, or that's possible under our current structure. Now, if Megan tells us, well, you really can't, they're not inseparable, I'd view it differently, but I haven't heard that from her.
Can I just make a comment? I think this may be going back and forth because this condition is sort of allowing for both options to occur. It's not, do we have to decide tonight, does the town have to accept this? I think that's really the Board of Selectmen's decision anyway. I think, if the condition is granted that, they're allowed a choice of, getting the appropriate approvals from the town and the Scatacquag Land Conservancy to take care of and own the land versus, turning it over to an HOA, they can sort of move forward with getting their approvals from those entities. That would give them the ability to, go forward and get those approvals.
Yes, Jim?
Well, you've got two alternatives up there. The town takes it or the HOA takes it. And what we're talking about is an intermediate that the town takes it subject to the HOA's obligation to maintain the drainage easement areas. So it's not one or the other, but somewhere in between. And as proposed, either the town takes it all or they do an HOA. And maybe we want the best of all worlds, but the town that we get the land but not the maintenance obligation that goes with it. But I'm still waiting for Megan to say, are they separable between road maintenance and drainage maintenance?
I mean, there are two different ways of maintaining. The structures that are in the road are maintained by the backbone truck. The features out, the drainage, infiltration basin and the swales, you'd have to get a crew to go and redig those or tune them up. So, although there's outlet structures in each of the ponds. So when you go down those access roads, there's a pond, but then there's a drainage structure that is an overflow structure that needs maintenance too. So there are, like, if you want to try and separate, in the road you have pipes and structures. In the easement areas you have ponds, but there are still some pipes and structures. So, I don't know how I feel about separating it, because your drainage system is all a closed system, and like at the end of the road where the cul-de-sac is, there are several pieces of long closed pipes that go down the whole access road and then outlet to a treatment swale. So where do you draw the line? You know what I mean? If we need to get to all closed pipes, then we need to get down most of the access road to where the pipe ends, which means we need to be able to, the access road needs to be in maintainable condition to get out to that point. They kind of overlap. I don't know if it's simple to just say pipes to be maintained by the town, infiltration basins and detention ponds and swales to be maintained by the HOA, and trying to separate it like that. I don't know. I mean, I'd personally like to talk to Carl about that a little more to see how he felt about that. I also think you get yourself into I hate to always think of the bad side of things, but the pointing finger. Say you have a catastrophic flood event or whatever, and there's damage to something. The HOA could say, hey, your system blew out water onto our pond, and now you have to, you know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. I don't know if that's...
What you're trying to say is the split maintenance of a system is not really the recommended end product.
I mean, I'd rather get Carl to back me up on that, but I don't think that's ideal.
To you.
And I think I would agree, that's not the best of alternatives, but why couldn't we just say that the town's only responsibility would be cleaning the catch basins? The structures and the pipes and everything else, I mean, I don't know, there's gotta be a way to make it work, so that we aren't thrusting the cost on to the backs of the taxpayers.
Can I ask just a question in terms of frequency of these events? If you think about the maintenance of drainage structures, I'll call DMHs, is that a yearly thing? Is it semi-annual? But when you get to the ponds and the swales or whatever, is that every 4 or 5 years? Is it, what's the frequency of some of these events?
Most maintenance is typically annual. I mean, if you read, the recommended maintenance is always way more, because they say, after every significant rain event, you're supposed to go out and do everything. You know what I mean? The VACON crew would typically clean, I believe, every structure at least once, but there's many structures that probably get cleaned monthly. It really depends where they are, how much water they get. In a development like this, where each structure is only taking so much water, you probably clean them once a year and you're fine, especially with 5-foot deep sumps. Could probably go every couple of years, honestly, with 5-foot deep sumps. But, we do have structures in town that take on way more water than they're probably supposed to, and just, the area around it, it does get a lot of sediment buildup. But I would guess, an annual cleaning would be more than enough of structures out in the road, and if it needs to be done twice, it does. But, I would guess an annual cleaning would be more than enough with the deep sumps that are proposed on the structures.
What about the basins and the drainage swale and the overflow?
Yeah, those are, I don't know it off the top of my head, I'd have to look at their AOT permit to see what it is, but, it's typically, like I said, really that's more of an inspection thing. Okay, you don't need to go scrub those out every year. You're supposed to be mowing them, keeping the grass a certain height. You wanna check your grates for any trash, debris, kind of clogging stuff. If there's any scouring, right, which we've added some riprap to prevent some of that stuff, but, if where the water comes into scouring, you gotta tune that up. Really, those shouldn't have to be cleaned out, more like a 5-year plan probably. After 5 years, if it got some sediment, you should have to go, maybe possibly stuff it out or something. But if you maintain your catch basins in the road, you really shouldn't have to go out there except maintain it and keep your slopes mowed and whatnot, and, I think that's really all. It
Okay.
doesn't need a lot.
I have a question.
Yes, Phil?
I'm hearing slopes mowed. Are there areas in these drainages that are in the, open space that have to have the slopes mowed?
Yeah.
I don't know even the equipment that we might have to do that. Just questioning it, I don't know. I don't know what's involved.
Barbara?
Just from the open space master plan point of view, I think it would be pointed out that while the town may have some maintenance expense, this is not solely at the point of the developer, that there are new rules requiring some of this as explained tonight, and that the town is getting the benefit of public access to this space, to include even some parking spaces that I believe were provided at the beginning of the road. So I just want to point, we're getting into, the bottom line is that there's a maintenance cost associated with this drainage for this plan, and nobody knows what it's gonna be, because it's a little more complicated and new. That's it. And the question is, which one of our development regs are we gonna do it under?
And I can tell you this, when it comes to infiltration practices, they've got to be maintained. You've gotta maintain that infiltration capacity. That means you've gotta make sure the floors don't become clogged, that debris doesn't accumulate in there, that you don't get woody debris or woody plant growth coming in there. They've got to be maintained. Otherwise, they won't infiltrate anymore. There is a lot of maintenance that goes into those to make sure that you preserve the infiltration capacity of the basins themselves.
You had a comment, Eric?
Yeah, just on the maintenance of the ponds and cutting of grass or mowing. All the slopes are 3-to-1, which is a mobile slope, but the requirement isn't necessarily go out there with even a brush hog to take care of these. They can be done with a weed whacker. The main emphasis is they do not want woody vegetation to grow up. They don't want trees to grow up that may have a chance of blowing down and tearing out the side of the pond. And as far as access, it's right down the same road that they would go to get to the invert. So it's not, they're all any slope there is accessible, and the reason why they want to maintain is so you don't have woody vegetation grow up that may tip over and cause a breach of the pond.
I understand, but I guess the concern that I have, Megan talks about the VACON truck going out and doing something, but the VACON truck is not a crew that goes out with weed whackers to do all of this stuff. So now we're looking at different crews that are different times of scheduling, and,
quite frankly, we've had discussions of possibly laying off three laborers that work on those crews, so I have no idea what's involved here.
Eric?
Our point is that we understand the position the town is in with fiscally, and it isn't something that's gonna go away or clear up quickly, but the maintenance of these being on the public with a public road, I don't know if there's been other projects ever approved where there's a public street, but yet the drainage has to be maintained privately. The amount of drainage we have here is more than what has been accustomed, but I don't know how many residential streets of public streets you've had come in here, even in the last year and a half. This is sort of new, and I know it's a lot, and that's why Public Works spoke up when they did, saying this is gonna be concerned, but they already have 60 or 70 other facilities that have to be maintained very similarly, that they admit they can't get to. It's not that this is the first one that has to be maintained, all of them do, and they recognize they don't have staff to do all the others either, and then Megan could correct me, it's a schedule they have to get on all these other projects, detention ponds that have to be maintained, and they haven't been able to schedule to get that in to do that.
Jim?
Barbara raised a good point about the quid pro quo obtaining public access, public ownership in return for assuming maintenance obligation. But for that, it's sort of like other than that, Mr. Lincoln, how does it play? But based on what Mr. Mitchell said and what Megan has said, I would be prepared to find that this is premature and scattered because it exceeds the town's capacity based upon the additional obligation unexpectedly imposed by the AOT rules, unless the applicant is willing to take over a certain amount of routine maintenance, that's the labor-intensive type that Megan described and Phil commented on, that we don't currently have the equipment to do. Namely, the routine maintenance of the drainage portions, and that appear to be a change, unlike what Mr. Mitchell said, from prior drainage structures because of Collis's point, the necessity of a higher level of routine maintenance to ensure infiltration. I think that is a change that this town would not have anticipated, and therefore is entitled to say we're not obligated to take on that responsibility. So my proposal is that the town would, and this is subject to a drainage maintenance agreement agreed to by the town and the applicant, would agree to the maintenance of the drainage structures along the road that's done with the existing equipment, but the applicant, as a condition, has to take on that responsibility, anticipating that it would contract to have that done, that the town have the right, if it's not done, to do it itself and assess the homeowners the fair cost of that. But Barbara can convince me that we don't need to do that because we're...
Bring up the other side.
Well, are we in a position this evening to approve this with conditions this evening, or are we wishing to see these documents and these discussions documented and agreed upon before we vote for final approval? Members of the board? Do you want to allow time for the applicant to work out this agreement, to give us a definitive schedule and the review and approval of both the Board of Selectmen and the PLC? And also to work with the proposed applicant, to work with Public Works to come up with a long-term maintenance agreement that's acceptable to this board in terms of how and whose responsibility and the ownership and the owners if they don't do it. As has been said, I don't have any real problem with the layout and the concept of open space and the town owning it for recreational purposes or whatever, if the town's willing to accept it. but that may not be the feel for the board. Lowell?
Since, several of us have commented about this being so new, maybe we do need to see that for this first time early on instead of making it a condition now.
Okay. Jim?
I don't mind conceptually approving this subject to an acceptable maintenance agreement. Typically, though, if you're going to do a final approval with a condition of that nature, you've spelled it out, so when they come in, they have to just show they meet those conditions. I'm not sure we're prepared to do that yet, because I've thrown out a concept, assuming people agree with it, you don't have to, I'm not offended. We haven't put the flesh on it, so I don't think we can do a final approval with conditions. Now, we can say to the applicant, we like the plan, and that's the only issue that has to come in, but it's not really a binding vote, because it's not a final vote. I don't think we have that power to bifurcate as a final decision. We have done those in the form of straw votes before, so we get issues off the table. But I don't know how else to do it unless we have a real proposal that we can just check off when it comes back to us.
Could I
Yes,
make a
Brian.
suggestion? One of the suggestions that I made earlier was to do a compliance hearing for, whether or not the HOA or whoever would maintain it. Part of the compliance hearing could be planning board would review and approve whatever drainage solutions were presented. And, that I think would still give the board the opportunity to review and make a more final decision at that point in time. And it would still make the approval only conditional upon whether or not you agreed that, yeah, that drainage solution meets our intent and what we, we're hoping to gain from this discussion.
I'm happy to do that if people want to. It's just leaving that solution a little nebulous, but I think that puts the burden on applicant.
Applicant to come up with something in a certain amount of time.
We want to take 5 minutes to think about it while we take a 10-minute break?
Well, the only problem with doing that is it's probably gonna take longer to resolve it if we come back after a break. I'll say I don't have a problem with a time-limited conditional approval with the condition of approval as with the third bullet up there, subject, set agreement to include specific provisions providing for compliance with our regulation, either A or B. I don't know whether it's in the regulations of 1 or 2, or, it's either a homeowners association or the town. And I think that the 2 waiver requests, I don't have an issue with. And conditions precedent 1 through 5 are standard, and I understand 6 through 24 are agreed to anyways.
I don't have any problem whatsoever with the plan, the engineering of the plan, the design of the plan. I don't have any problem with that. I don't have a problem with the waivers. I can live with the detention basins being in the open space. I hear Jim saying, yeah, easements are written all the time that allow for certain activities. I'm sure if the PLC had their druthers, they'd rather have it clean. Cleaner's always better, but, if the PLCs can accept that with those allowed uses within the easement, that's fine. But I want to see some sort of a program set up whereby the maintenance is taken over by a homeowners association or some private entity other than the town of Goffstown.
Okay. Carl? Steve?
I'm okay with with the approach of having a compliance hearing, if we're gonna be able to look at a long-term maintenance agreement that's been agreed upon, the DPW has given some input. You know,
Well, given the, being an optimist, I'll be a pessimist. What if they can't reach an agreement?
Additional approvals.
No good.
Or they have to come back before us and ask us to modify it.
Right.
Put the burden on the applicant.
Okay. As long as they understand that. Yes, Megan?
Is it worth, you know, if you're leaning toward the splitting the maintenance of the town does the road and the HOA does the outside stuff, I really would like to involve Carl in that, because that's nothing we're doing right now, splitting like that. And so I don't know what the better way is to go, but if that's where you guys are leaning, should you continue this so that we can at least get Carl's input on that versus make that an approval condition? Or at least some of what I've heard is if Carl's saying you make all the drainage an HOA, then I guess I don't care. But if you're talking about splitting it and the town's involved in partial maintenance of it, I'd like to get Carl's input on that to see if he thinks that's feasible. Because if that's gonna cause a lot of finger pointing between the homeowners association and the town, and Carl thinks that's a real mess, and, you know, he may wanna go talk to the board about it, I don't know. So, I guess I'm a little hesitant about it.
Yes, Eric?
If I'm not in a position to make your motion for you, and I certainly wouldn't suggest I could do that, but I think part of what's being said, that if we have a compliance hearing, everything that Megan is concerned about can be done in the meantime, between now and then. Have input from Public Works, input from the applicant, input from what's happening in other areas, look into the financial aspect of it, and everything else that needs to be done. It would still be brought back to the board for their review and approval of whatever comes back. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, but it has to be something you will approve. You may decide at that time it's all or nothing, but it gives us an opportunity to come back. Just as we're working with an easement with the Conservancy, some of the language in there may be different to the town attorney, some may be different to the board, but we can work that out at a later date at a compliance hearing. And we can do the same with maintenance of the structures, to the satisfaction of the board, which would certainly be after input from Public Works, staff, and others.
Well, not having a great calendar of being able to see how long things take to happen, is there any member of the board wishing to step up and make a motion to?
A motion. Always happy to make a motion. I'm gonna take the position that we're going to approve, but for certain things are gonna be reserved to a compliance hearing. Let people sort out what that means in fact, but that we approve the plan subject to one is that we grant the waivers of
The length of the cul-de-sac?
the length of the cul-de-sac and the well radius overlap, and the basis for granting the waiver of the cul-de-sac length is the benefit the town will obtain from having public access to this land.
We'll take that as a separate motion
Yes.
on the two waivers first?
The reason I want that is that is the basis, and I don't wanna have the public access then taken away and found we gave something away and need it back, so.
So there's a motion on the floor to approve the two requested waivers.
And the second portion of the waiver request is on the well rate is for the reasons Megan said, that it's not necessary here because the drainage that's being affected is not coming from the road, but rather from on lots, so therefore it doesn't have the salt contamination issue.
So we have a motion to approve the waivers 1 and 2, and a second by Lowell. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The chair
Who's the voting alternate?
Carl is. And the chair votes yes. Unanimous approval on the two requested waivers. Jim?
Second, I move that we approve the plan, subject to the conditions set forth in Brian's write-up. Actually, it's 1 through 27, unless some of these are now moot. And a establishment of a drainage maintenance plan acceptable to the board to be presented to the board at a compliance hearing to be scheduled within 6 months, which will also address that the conditions 1 through 27 have been satisfied.
And do you want to add anything about the status of the ownership and maintenance of the open space?
That's a good point. Let me get out of character for a minute. The question there is, separate that from the maintenance obligation, is that the ownership either be established by, as proposed by the town with a PLC conservation easement, or with a homeowners association, with public access granted. But question is, will that be determined within 6 months? I guess the answer can be, they can always come back later to try to get a modification if they get the town approval. So, yeah, let's add that to the list, and a determination of the ownership. But that the approval is based on the condition as presented, but for the drainage and landscaping doesn't have to be accepted by the town. How's that for convoluted?
Well, just to, but I'm looking for a second to the motion before I try to
I'll second it.
shorten this. Seconded by Collis. Is that it's comprised of 3 factors. The items 1 through 27 on the approval, that the drainage maintenance agreement be worked out between the developer and the town within a period of 6 months.
And approved by this board.
And approved by this board. And then thirdly, that the town and PLC or homeowners association with public access be granted over the common areas. We have a second by Collis. Any discussion on that motion, or the basis of? Yes,
Did you formally close the public hearing before we started on that?
not really.
I was gonna mention that.
I got ahead of myself.
That's just a hypothetical motion. We'll make it again when we're.
Okay, so that seems to be a reasonable consensus of opinion. How's that at the moment? Backtracking a little bit, hearing no further discussion from members of the board, I will close the public hearing at this time.
I'll now make a motion,
Please, Jim.
but I think that's,
Please read it back.
as previously stated.
As, the motion as previously stated and seconded by Collis. Now, is there any discussion by members of the board?
So do I understand that this will be affirmatively set on the agenda for November, December, January, February, March, April? So that we have that coming up, so we expect to either see something or have some sort of a request by the applicant before that meeting, rather than have this just sort of come forward as a little action item for us. I really think if we're gonna do this, and I'm fine with this, because it's making us pay attention to our conditions, I really want it set for an agenda, because otherwise it floats.
How about so I don't have a calendar for 2011?
Well, I'm not, it doesn't
But-
need to be part of the motion, it's just if I vote
Oh, I
for it,
think
it's
it does.
conditioned on that.
I think it does. Date specific, first meeting of the board in April 2011.
Now I'm seeing some,
Maybe the 14th.
I think if you make it date specific, it would actually sort of prohibit the applicant from coming in sooner than that if they wanted to. And
why?
Well, it's on or before.
On or before?
On or before?
if you make it on or before, then
Yeah.
that
So if
works.
they even come
Would
in,
you-
it's gonna
would you
show
have-
up that day.
Would you amend your motion, Jim, to honor before April 14th, 2011?
So, I mean, it's not a substantive change, because we already said 6 months. Yeah, I'll make that.
And Collis, would
My
you?
understanding.
Okay. Then we have date specific, almost. All right, any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Chair votes yes. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Project is approved with conditions.
Thank you.
Oh, gee.
And
I thought that
the
could
two
wait.
waivers have been granted. Thank you for your persistence. And we will take a 10-minute break before we get into our next regular scheduled project.
Hold it, well, I don't know, Dan.
Agenda, which is map 5, lot 61-1 and 95-1. Site plan and conditional use permit for a proposed, go back to item 2. It really is map 7, lot 82, site plan review hearing for existing landscaping business located on property along with residence, and to build a 2,400 square foot barn for the business, Fournier Revocable Trust, Patty Hill Road, zoned agricultural, continued from September 9, 2010. Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've been through several of these slides several times, so I'm not gonna belabor it too much. But the property is located on Patty Hill Road. It's on the west side, zoned agricultural. This is a zoning map, and also the topo map. This is an aerial prior to when filling was done. This is an aerial after some of the filling and excavation or moving around land was done on November 26, 2006. Request to approve is to approve the site plan for a landscaping business on the subject property. This is the site plan documents. This is the existing conditions map. Shows all the existing locations of the salt shed and the fueling station, and where the landscaping items and that type of thing are. The site plan that's been submitted shows the new location of a barn that is 40 by 60 with a 20 by 60 covered parking area. It also shows the relocation of the salt shed and some additional drainage structures that have been designed to take care of flows across the property. Then these are some additional pages from the site plan documents, and I'll just kind of keep those for discussion if we need them at a later time. This is elevations of the proposed barn. Shows all 4 elevations and then a section. This is the elevations of the salt shed, the proposed salt shed. We have a landscape plan showing new trees and shrubs to be planted along the north and west sides of the property, or the west edge of the barn. Key considerations, staff has gone through the most recent site plan that was submitted. We've given our comments to the applicant and included any comments that we had in the staff report as conditions of approval. Salt shed shows a concrete pad to be put on the floor of the salt shed, addressing the variance condition that they had a impervious surface placed there. They're also placing a concrete pad in front of the fueling station so that spilling won't occur into the ground and cause contamination. The applicant has been advised by the DES that they don't need an AOT permit. The variance states that there be additional screening of all material and equipment, and that all buildings and materials shall be set back 25 feet from all property lines. Staff has reviewed the plan and feels that the additional landscaping along the north and west sides of this property addresses this issue. They have also met the issue of keeping everything 25 feet off the property line. And actually, Mr. Fournier brought up to me a point that I think has just been a typo in my report for the past few reports, and that is on page 15 of the packet. Number 13, double I, says the ZBA required that all buildings and materials shall meet the 25-foot setback requirements. And then my statement says the fuel station as shown on the proposed site plan does not meet, does not conform to the 25-foot setback. That is an incorrect statement. It does conform to the 25-foot setback. So, I'm not sure why that typo happened, but it's there and it's wrong. Timing of the project, the applicant has gone through several changes on the property and processed things, and I'm not gonna go off through all these items again. Did want to point out that it was brought up to me by about Mr. Gibson that in the last meeting it made it sound like my statements inferred that permits had been pulled for all of the electrical services on the property. I just want to make it clear that the permit that was pulled was for one service station or one service outlet on the property, and no other permits were pulled through the town for electrical service on the property. And I actually I took a picture of what that service was for, and that's for that structure right there in the middle, right here. That provides a meter and an outlet for electrical use on the property. Now, there are a couple other places on the property where there is electrical service. This is on the south side of the property where vehicles would be connected to it. And then the fueling station also has some electrical service to it for lighting. That being said, that's just for clarification purposes. This is the table of salt testing that had been done a while back, and that's also here for any discussions that we want to have. There are no waivers being requested for the project. These photos we've seen, so I'll kind of go through them. Staff recommendation is that the board hear the applicant's presentation, continue the public hearing, conditionally approve the site plan subject conditions listed in the staff report, and any changes the board sees fit to impose. And then in your packet from tonight that was given to you, there's some additional changes to the conditions that I wanted to go through really quickly. This is in response to both the applicant's attorney's letter to the board, and also to some concerns that were brought up by Mr. Gibson in conversation with me at the town. The first one is, and this would replace condition number 17. 17 in the report states that all of the above requests by the Conservation Commission listed under number 11 of the key considerations in this report shall be required conditions of approval of the site plan. That is being replaced by the statement, the property owner shall institute the sodium chloride monitoring guidelines as outlined in the guideline document for 177 Patty Hill Road, Goffstown, New Hampshire, for Fournier Family Revocable Trust, attached to this report as Exhibit A, and more specifically clarified under number 11 of the key considerations of the staff report dated October 6, 2010, with the following clarification. And this is kind of the important part of the change. Staff report key consideration number 11G, and I'll state what 11G, well, 11G used to just be tests shall be done until it meets the recommended maximum levels to the satisfaction of the town engineer. What I'm adding is, additionally, after an order has been issued by the town to cease using the salt shed due to exceeding the maximum contamination level, the use of the salt shed shall be allowed to resume only when the property owner can submit test results that show sodium chloride levels below the maximum contamination level. And then the last statement, in the event of any conflict between the two documents, the property owner shall apply the stricter of the two documents. So that's the first change. The second one is just a kind of a clarification on condition number 10. Right now, condition number 10 states the property owner shall follow the best management practices as outlined by the DES for design and construction of the salt shed and the drainage around the salt shed, as well as for salt storage and loading and unloading of salt on the premises. That's being changed to the property owner shall follow the best management practices for storages and structures and on-site management, delivery, handling, loading, as set forth in the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services fact sheet, storage, WDDWGB 2230, storage and management of salt de-icing materials 2010. Attached to this report is Exhibit B. The salt shed shall be modified to conform to this document. That's basically just to clarify what the requirement would be for them to follow those best management practices, make sure that the documents were stated correctly with the names. The third one is a new condition, and this was brought up by the abutter regarding some information that was in the application from the zoning variance application. And the statement that was in the variance application basically said that the number of employees would be limited to 4 to 5 employees parking on the site. And seeing as this property has 6 parking spaces, the applicant wanted to make sure that the clarification, or sorry, the abutter wanted to make sure that the information that was provided to the zoning board when they made their decision was part of the record and was somehow included as either a condition or somehow reiterated that the applicant stated that 4 to 5 employees would be allowed to park on the site. And so rather than making the property owner applicant change their site plan and reduce the number of parking stalls, the allowable parking stalls can remain, and the limitation would be on the number of employees allowed to park in those parking stalls. So the new condition reads, parking spaces on the property shall be limited to 6 as provided on the proposed site plan. However, the number of employees allowed to park their vehicles on the property shall be limited to 5 as stated in the variance application by the applicant dated December 22nd, 2008. Those are the conditions, the changes to the conditions proposed. You have the staff report and everything else in front of you, so I'll turn the time over to the board for any comments and questions.
Member of the board, any questions? Barbara?
What and where is this fence that they're talking about putting up in addition to all the landscaping materials?
There is, well, I'll go back to the site plan here.
You want to just go back and point it out with your pointer to me so I can really make... Keep going.
Sorry.
No, it's back and towards the beginning.
Okay.
No, I think it's before that one.
This one shows the parking area. So the parking areas
I got
are
the
right
parking
here.
areas.
There's gonna be a fence along this area right here in front of the parking areas, so that it'll screen it from the property to the south.
Okay.
The trees that are there are being removed for a
Right, this
water
retention,
treatment.
No,
detention area is causing
I
the
understand. I just,
need for it.
I sort of recalled some discussion about it at a previous meeting. I wanted to make sure that's what we were talking about. Okay.
May I ask a question in terms of this new condition 18? Since we're not privy to the record of the ZBA, nor their findings, nor their application processes. Why is it that we would not just say that it be in compliance with the application and the decision of the ZBA in terms of conditions?
That's entirely up to the board if you wanna, clarify that.
I don't know.
I would prefer not to do that. This has had a significant amount of discussion and changes, and I think a plan that references any other document or place should be avoided at all costs.
Okay.
So I would sort of concur with the recommendation made to simply have it as a note in
Okay.
regards to the parking spaces.
All right. Any other board members have a question or observation at the moment? I'm going to open it up to the applicant. Sir, would you like to address the board?
Thank you. My name is Kevin Baum. I'm Divine Millimet, representing Mr. Fournier tonight. I'll try to be brief. It's already been a long night, and as always, Brian's done a great job of covering everything. I think at this point, this has been a pretty, been a long time getting to this, so you're all fairly familiar with what's been done. Just briefly wanted to cover a few of the things. I know that there have been a number of concerns on this property. I think we've, over the course of these meetings, I think we have addressed them. One thing that I know is in the notes but wasn't in the presentation tonight is the DES's decision on wetlands and determination that there had not been wetlands filled on the property. And again, a determination by DES that an alteration of terrain permit was not required. Quickly with respect to the electrical permit, my understanding is the permit was pulled. It was for a single line which serviced all of the outlets that you saw in that picture. In the end, I'm not sure moving forward how much it's an issue, because that line is to service the fuel station, which is going to be moved and which will be re-permitted. So just briefly, as I think Brian mentioned, that we had provided in the interim a letter in response to some of the abutters' concerns. I think we've through previous changes and proposed conditions and Brian's proposed conditions, I think we address all of the major concerns of the abutters, including the concerns for salt monitoring, the proposed plan, our proposal, which mirrors what Brian has listed as a proposed condition, addresses concerns and comments by the Conservation Commission and mirrors a proposed condition by the abutters attorney at the last meeting. Just briefly, I won't go through our proposed conditions because essentially they at this point match what Brian had proposed, with the exception of parking. Just one point of clarification. I have no issue, Mr. Fournier has no issue with limiting the parking to 5 employees, but we do disagree with the interpretation that that's a requirement of the ZBA. 4 to 5 employees was discussed as an estimate in the application materials. It wasn't a condition discussed by the ZBA or imposed by the ZBA. And just one point of clarification, I also just like to note that I disagree with the abutters Attorney Callan's interpretation and case that he cited regarding information included in the application. That case addresses implied conditions and ultimately didn't find that there were any applied conditions in that case. Ultimately, just like to raise it as just as a disagreement with the inclusion of the, or discussion of the ZBA, and no issue with limitation on 5 parking spaces. That will work for Mr. Fournier's business, and quite frankly, we'd just like to move forward. Another issue raised at the last hearing was compaction of the soils and the detention ponds. GSI Geotechnical Services has been out on the property. A report has been submitted. GSI found that the soil was compacted. It's been compacted in place with no threat of global failure. That's in the report, and also Kevin Maynard is of GSI, who did the site work, is here tonight, and he's happy to answer any questions and is happy to give some overview of the work that was done if the board would like. Lastly, just like to just indicate, though I believe it's also in the proposed conditions, that Mr. Fournier has had discussions with the fire inspector, and those comments have been incorporated within the proposed conditions as well with respect to the revisions to the fueling station design. So that's all. If you have any questions for me, Mr. Fournier, I should also note that Don Duval, Duval Survey is here tonight, not planning on making any presentation because the plans have really not changed.
I have a question, sir.
Mm-hmm.
On the plan that was presented to the zoning board of adjustment, in your presentation, did it have the same number of parking spaces on it? As shown on the present plan, or was there 5?
I honestly don't think I think we just showed where the parking was gonna be, but I don't think we had actually delineated where the.
On that park, yeah, it was a show to the existing parking, which has been changed on this. The reference to 5 was in the application materials, which said there are generally 4 to 5 employees on the property.
Okay. All right, thank you. Jim?
It's more really a question for Brian, but should we have as a condition of approval that all building and electrical permits be issued, or do we leave that to building department to enforce? And to the extent there are improvements that are remaining that were built without required permits, should we require that permits be granted or something done as to those? Or again, do we leave that to the building electrical inspection process?
Would it in fact be, since they're all new buildings and all relocated, that it would be all new electrical for all those facilities anyways, which would require a totally new site plan and electrical permit for each of those?
I'd like to hear a representation from somebody other than the board chair that that's what's happening.
Okay, fine.
Yes, other than that is yes, that is what's happening. Everything is either it's new construction or relocation.
I'll try to hold myself back.
Can I just answer something?
Yes, Brian?
The salt shed that was not permitted is getting taken down, and then the new salt shed that was redesigned is getting permitted, and the fuel station will be moved with new electrical and re-permitted also. I don't think there'll be anything at that point that would have anything, no permits at all.
You would also have electrical for your storage building?
Yes.
The barn.
Okay, the barn? Okay. You gonna have any toilet facilities or plumbing out there? Okay. Members of the board have some other questions? Lowell? Steve?
Yeah, I guess the only question I had is the issue of hours of operation. There's a condition, number 7, that suggests that the hours of operation would be from 7 a.m. till 8 p.m. But then it goes on and says, however, the applicant may conduct his own operations, including snow plowing operations at other times, provided that it does not become a nuisance. There shall be no deliveries of materials to the site prior to 7 a.m. and after 8 p.m. When I read that, it suggests to me that the only restriction outside of the hours of operation relates to delivery, and I guess I'm not sure what is meant by that and what's the intent of the applicant, if we imposed restrictions on the hours of operation, what would be happening outside of those hours? What falls under his own operations?
It would be primarily the snow plowing operations. The concern with limiting hours of operation is not deliveries, but more, I mean, if the snow falls, the employees have to mobilize, and they have to mobilize on site and take equipment off site. If I think some discussion, and I think Brian, if loading could occur within those hours of operation limitation, it's more keeping the ability for Brian's employees to go on and off the site, either because they're getting back from a job in the non-winter season where they get back late and have to drop off the equipment, or because they have to more importantly, they have to mobilize for a snow event.
So if I understand that right, it's more the coming and going?
That's correct. That's the intention.
So there wouldn't be loading of the trucks with the salt?
And that's what I wanna clarify, that's the whole purpose of the building, is so trucks are sitting inside the building, already preloaded. My guys come in, they go into the building, they drive out. That's the limit of the activity at that point. As of right now, I can't do that.
Carlos?
I was confused with that as well, Stephen. Way I understood it, this is intended to allow him to maintain his property at other hours. Keep the yard plowed, just as any other homeowner or any other business would want to do. Is that what the intent is? In other words, it's the middle of a snowstorm, I want to plow my yard.
Well,
he
wants to buy everybody's yard. Well, generally, the other thing is let's say I go to my camp on the weekend and I bring my Bobcat and I come home on a Sunday, I drive in the yard with my Bobcat from my camp. I guess I just wanted to make sure there was some clarification on that, to the fact that I may be at another place that I own, coming back with, a lawnmower or something myself, not so much my employees.
So
I guess I was just trying to make sure that we were clear on this.
So would it be clear if it said, however, the applicant may maintain his own property, including snow plowing operation? That the intent?
But
I'm just trying to get clarification, because it's a confusing condition. I don't understand it.
I don't believe that's the intent. I mean, yes, the intent is to be able to maintain the property, and some of that has nothing to do with the landscaping business, since it's also residential. But we do not want to lose the ability to be able to immobilize. It's part of the business, an important part of the business to have. So your suggested language, I think, would take away that ability for the employees to come to essentially mobilize and demobilize from the property in off hours.
Okay, well, the way it's worded is confusing to me. I think it needs to be reworked somehow,
Sure.
because that's not clear to me, how we would enforce that.
I think
Brian?
I think maybe a possible option on that would be if we had the landscape business hours of X, like it showing the 7 to 8 or what have you, and then that we just are allowed to mobilize for our snow plowing operations. That's all. I guess that's really all I'm looking for.
All right, okay. Jim?
But if I understand from the applicant, that would not include loading materials or,
It should be done during the.
okay.
So,
I'm making notes here.
yep.
Barbara?
So just as clarification, are we talking about regular regular professional landscaping hours of operations are gonna be from 7 to 8? But the applicant wants to be able to conduct his own property-related operations and professional snow plowing operations at other times, so long that it's not a nuisance, with no deliveries between 7 AM and 8 PM.
Pretty much clarified it, yeah.
Okay.
Although, if I may, I mean, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be easier in terms of enforcement and just clarify to just maybe just be more specific that the, rather than hours of operation, just deliveries, loading and unloading of equipment shall occur between 7 AM and 8 PM.
No, I think there's a difference between what you just said and material delivery to the site. Because somebody might drive on to the site at 7:30 at the end of the day with a Bobcat used in a professional job during the day on the back of a trailer, and the owner may decide on his own, he's gonna go out and move that Bobcat to truck X, because that's where he wants it in the morning, and I think under what you're talking about, that wouldn't be allowed, and it should be. If you're gonna approve it, I mean, that's,
Okay. I understand. Just going around the room.
Yeah, no, I understand Barbara's point.
Carl, any
I
questions?
understand, no, that's fine.
Jim? Okay,
Well, no, I say this kind of, I can't. Given what's happened before, and the proximity of houses in the area, while there's been a variance granted for the use, it's reasonable to put on some clear standards of what can be done and what can't be done. And they may inconvenience the owner at certain times, in that he can't go out at 2 in the morning and move his Bobcat around, not that he probably wants to do that. And I think that's okay to put those restrictions on. Similarly, maybe he doesn't plow his parking lot at 2 AM if that's gonna be a problem. It's okay to put those restrictions on because of where this is and what it is in the history of this. So I think Mr. Baum's proposal is a reasonable one. It allows him to conduct the commercial snowplow operation without the noisy loading and of stuff or mounting of equipment. They can come and go. And that's a reasonable permitted activity. But to expand it much beyond, I think you're inviting some of the problems that we're trying to avoid.
Okay.
I would rather constrain it slightly, but reasonably.
all right. Okay,
You know, frankly, if he can do it, nobody hears about it. I don't think we'll ever hear about it, you know.
all right. Well, Megan, do you have any concerns on the site plan?
No.
Okay. Conservation? Okay,
I just had
See-
a clarification.
yeah, okay, go ahead, Carl.
On the plan, I noticed that, there's a proposed new location for mulch piles, and then on one of the sheets, it says snow storage. Is this just snow storage for on-site? You're not bringing off-site snow to on-site, just on-site snow, okay,
Putting on the other side.
thanks.
So the question you're asking is the clarification that there's no off-site
Off-site
snow
snow
brought onto the site,
Brought onto the site.
okay?
I had a
Carlos.
couple other conditions that I guess I want a clarification on, I don't understand. On number 12, and I think this is just a wording issue, talks about the owner providing a permanently mounted portable fire extinguisher. Interesting mix of words. I think, are we trying to say a permanent mount for a portable fire extinguisher?
Yes.
Is that what we're trying to say?
That's a fire department requirement for the fueling station.
Okay, and then 14, it says, "The property owner shall demonstrate emergency fuel pump shutdown." What does that mean? Demonstrate to who? Demonstrate what, how? What are we trying to
I'll
require?
let
here?
Brian,
From what I understood from Lieutenant Connors is that we put a laminated sheets discussing how to do all the shutdown, emergency shutdown, if there's a spill, what to do.
oh, so by demonstrate, you mean
Should provide instructions.
public viewing?
Yes, and
He
I-
wants laminated sheets
That's
right
what-
there,
so
so
if
anybody
something
there
happens,
can
they know
knows
what
how
to
to
do.
do it,
Okay,
okay.
so we need to clean that up a little, I think. And then, it says the property owner shall, on 15, property owner shall maintain lighting at the fuel station to ensure safe and spill-free fueling There's the times of day that may be dark, I assume that
As
means.
opposed to times at night that might be light.
I think,
Hours
what
of
we're trying to say
operation.
here is that when it's dark from 6 to 8, he's allowed to operate till 8, so when it's dark from 6 to 8, he can light, is that what we're saying, is that what that means? Okay.
But we would hope those lights don't infringe upon the neighbors.
That's my
Yeah.
question I had now, and this doesn't override the zoning lighting standards.
That is
Yeah.
correct.
Right.
Not the suggestion that it does in any way.
Okay.
Subject to applicable zoning restrictions, comma.
So,
I think that wording can be cleaned up a little, make it more.
To move things forward, I would like to avail the public of an opportunity to speak if they wish. You will have an opportunity to speak again at the end. Is there anybody in the audience wishing to speak in reference to this application? Yes, sir, please come forward.
I guess, first and foremost, you know, the whole thing about.
Dean Gibson, right?
Dean Gibson,
Yep.
down to the south. Our concern at this last meeting was, what are the stabilities of the bankings? Let's prove that they're stable for these ponds. I haven't heard his engineer make that, presentation to what those are, because I have Frank Miller here from Miller Engineering, who can't make any sense of what he's showing to you people tonight. So I guess we'd like to hear his presentation so we can counter it. I guess.
Do you have a prepared report from your professional expert?
Mr. Miller would like to testify, I guess.
We had a report presented to us, I read it, I'm satisfied with it.
Well,
Yeah.
but they're entitled to count.
They're entitled to
Yeah,
counter
I
it.
know, I'm
well,
just
but
saying.
they
I'm-
have it. Do we need a presentation,
Yeah,
or
why
do
do
they
we need a
just want to
presentation of it?
counter it?
We've all received a copy of that report, Mr. Gibson.
Right.
You have not been recognized, Mr. Miller.
So just for clarification, this is the report, you're speaking about the report that we provided from
Right.
GSI, not a separate report.
Right.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay, before Frank gets up though, I'd like to, you guys hand these around the table. These are the specific, representations that Mr. Baum made in obtaining his variance to operate on this property.
Do you need a copy? Do you
No.
need some?
And, you know, here we are, whatever the time this is later, 2 years later, he feels that he doesn't have to, you know, the wording that he used to obtain this variance, he doesn't think he has to stand behind it anymore. You know, I was gonna put in a shop to, sell gas, but I'm just kidding, I'm gonna sell hazardous waste instead. You know, I don't get it. He said he was gonna work weekdays only. He said he was only gonna have 4 to 5 employees. He said he was only gonna come in the morning and leave at night during normal business hours. What are normal business hours? They're 7 in the morning to 8 at night? Does anybody here want a business running next to them from 7 in the morning to 8 o'clock at night? I mean, those are normal business hours. Is there not, you know, some kind of a court decision of deciding what normal business hours? They can't be 7 in the morning to 8 o'clock at night in the residential zone. They just can't be. That's unreasonable. I don't think anybody sitting at this board would want somebody running 7 in the morning to 8 o'clock at night next to them. You know, why doesn't he have to follow what he obtained this variance to run? You know, we looked at this application when he applied for it, and this is how he wanted to run his business, but now he doesn't wanna run on that criteria anymore.
Okay. Anything else, Dean?
No?
Mr. Miller, you have the floor. Please come forward and introduce yourself.
My name is Frank Miller, Miller Engineering and Testing. Mr. Gibson asked me to take a look at the site plan and geotechnical information that was supplied by GSI, which I've done. He asked me to look at the information and to put together an independent slope stability analysis based on that information. Just received this information last week. I've gone through it, and based on my review, there isn't enough information, enough geotechnical information for me to evaluate this slope. It's a very steep slope. It's, I measured out at 1.6 to 1 to 2 to 1, which is a very steep slope condition, dry. This slope is going to be supporting detention ponds, retention ponds, actually holding water. the GSI analysis took into account that the slope would be a fully saturated slope, which is a conservative assumption, and it's one that I would have made. I just simply don't have enough subsurface information to characterize the thickness and the strength of the fill, as well as the strength of the natural soil under the fill. The test pits that were dug were taken 6 feet to 11 feet in depth, and really a slope stability evaluation is going to involve much deeper exploration. So I guess the answer to Mr. Gibson's question is I cannot perform a slope analysis based on the available data, and I have not done so. So I think they're lacking subsurface data at this point.
May I ask?
Members of the board? Yes, Jim?
Are you saying, Ms. Miller, that the conclusion that this is a stable slope is not, or cannot be supported by the analysis that was done as presented in this report?
There were assumptions that were made based on, the shallow test pits that were dug, and I can't substantiate. I'm not sure if there's other information out there, such as field reports or field tests that were done as this fill was being placed. Those may support some of the assumptions that were made, but I can't find the support of test data in the reports to support the analyses.
May I ask you a follow-up?
Yes.
That's different than saying this conclusion is wrong. It's just that you can't make that conclusion based on this
Right.
information.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying that their result is wrong. I'm saying I just can't, I don't have the data personally to back up the assumptions that were made. And it is a steep slope. It's anything over 2 to 1 is getting very steep, and when you consider the potential, if there was a failure on the adjacent property, that is going to cause a big problem on the south property to the south. So and it's very close to that property line. I think I measured it 10 to 15 feet. The toe of slope is 10 to 15 feet from the 163 Patty Hill Road property. And, I think the risk is pretty high, in really making a lot of assumptions on a slope like this. So I haven't performed any independent slope stability analyses. I don't have enough information to do that with what was provided.
Just like to ask the question, as a starting point, what would be a slope that you would recommend as a starting point without analysis? Just as a normal rule of thumb, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 1 to 1? They all have slope treatments that you can do for all of those.
Yeah, a lot of towns that I work in get concerned with anything steeper than a 3 to 1. That you really need to start looking at engineered analyses when you get steeper than 3 to 1.
Okay.
And that's looking at global stability factors as well as surface erosion factors, which you typically can deal with pretty easily with a 3 to 1 slope.
Okay. Members of the board, do we have any other questions at the moment for Mr. Miller? Seeing none, thank you very much. Is there anybody else wishing to speak in reference to this application? Any abutters wishing to speak about this application? Does the applicant wish to make further comments?
Yeah, I think just briefly, if Kevin Maynard could just make a few comments on that.
Please come forward, Kevin.
Kevin Maynard for GSI. And we ran a slope stability analysis based on our test pits and our lab testing of the material. And the material seemed pretty well cemented, pretty well compacted by years of trafficking. I mean, we didn't run any compaction tests, and we don't actually have any test boring data that would give you your actual density. But our stability analysis was based on the worst case scenario, based on the soil mass being saturated, based on the detention ponds being completely full, and the worst case slope steepness and also the highest point of the slope. We ran two different analyses, one each for the highest cross-section, one for the steepest cross-section, and both were well within safe limits.
Members of the board have any questions, Mr. Maynard?
Can some of us look to our left and right and ask the gentleman there to respond, because this is something that some of us have less knowledge of than others, but I assume that the engineers and the board can better process some of this.
I'm sure that we have the professional expertise in the board that will lend their opinion during the deliberations to some extent. And we'll probably rely on Megan to give us some insight. Potentially, she's smiling. That's a good sign.
Well, let me ask a question, if I
Yes.
may, then. You said there's certain things you did not do. You did not run a compaction test and one other thing.
It wasn't the intent of the study. It wasn't to test the compaction of the soil. It was to test the stability of the slope and to ensure that the slope was safe.
So in your opinion, was the testing there that you did sufficient to support your conclusion about the stability of the slope?
I mean, I would think so. I mean, I did the field testing, and my boss conducted the analysis, and
So the answer is yes?
the answer is yes.
And just to follow up, Mr. Miller, and I understand engineers like lawyers will have different views of things, where the sky is blue, suggested there's further testing that would have to be done. Do you know what that testing would be?
I mean, you can always consider more testing that would give you more data, which would definitely help you out. If you wanted to do a test boring, it would give you definitely better information than doing a single test pit. I mean, it wouldn't hurt, but it's not necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Anybody wishing to address the board? Mr. Gibson?
The directive of the board at the last meeting was to determine compaction and stability. And it was actually recommended by one of the board members to do a core sample to find out those two answers. And according to Mr. Miller, what he told me this afternoon, that's really the only way for anybody to know that. I mean, to go out there with an excavator and dig holes and dig a 11-foot hole and a 17-foot banking to try to figure out if we have compaction, and then lay the materials all back in the hole of the excavator. Have we just disturbed everything we're trying to figure out if it's stable and compacted? Now we're gonna put 5,000 gallons of water on top of that? We only dug 11-foot hole in a 17-foot banking. What about, what's the rest of the material down there? You know, this material all came from multiple parts of town. Some of it came from Parsons Landing, some of it came from his property, some of it came from sewer waste, some of it came from everywhere. What, you didn't, Brian?
Mr. Gibson, Mr. Fournier, please address the chair,
Okay,
not each other.
okay. I'm just telling you, I lived it, so there's a multitude of soils, whether they got into the depths of them or they didn't, or they stayed in the depths of what came off the top of the property or where it came from, I don't know. It seems to me if you're trying to figure out if materials are stable, you don't, you know, the best way to do it is with a core sample. We're not disturbing everything you're now gonna build 5,000-gallon ponds on.
Mr. Maynard?
The material was taken from on-site, from the northerly part of the site. And when you dug the test pits, the difference between the fill and the fill line was so hard to differentiate that even the environmental scientist who wrote his report before I did had a hard time finding the line of the fill and the native soil below because the material was so consistent. I mean, I saw no evidence in the test pits that any of the material was taken from anywhere but on-site.
Chair, could you ask Mr. Fournier?
Dean, you will be recognized. Mr. Maynard, you still have the floor.
I'm all set.
Mr. Baum?
I'd just like to make a comment going back. Two comments, just looking through the minutes. The concern, this was on page 19 of Collis Adams, is that the concern is of slope and stability. And just to clarify, I'm not giving any opinion as to what the proper slope should be or whether Mr. Miller's statement was correct, but just that looking back at the minutes, Bob Rook, the engineer, had stated that the proposed slope is 3 to 1.
Okay.
But it doesn't exceed any.
Okay.
To the line there.
All right. Members of the board? Any questions of the applicant? Any questions in reference to the applicability of the information presented by the applicant and the public? Wish to ask any questions of the public or the applicant? You had your hand up, Mr. Gibson, you got one last shot.
Could the board please ask Mr. Fournier if all the fill that's on that property came from his property?
I don't,
Could he respond to that?
no. Other board members that may disagree, and they can ask the applicant the question. Mr. Gibson?
In Mr. Baum's letter that was dropped off to the town a week ago, he makes reference to the impervious surface that we asked for at the last meeting that we were at, and says that it would be, unduly burdensome for Mr. Fournier. Given the proximity to my wetlands and his previous performance on how he feels about the environment, I don't find that it's unduly burdensome whatsoever. I mean, I just don't. I think that's the minimal thing we could ask for.
What are you asking for, Mr.
I'm
Gibson?
asking that he wash all his equipment on impervious soil and collect, impervious surface and collect everything that's coming off it. He brings in his machines every single night and power washes them.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Members of the board, we still have an open public hearing, and do we want a discussion before I officially close the public hearing? Members of the board? The applicant have any last comments? I'll close the public hearing. Members of the board? I see 4 or 5 things in the discussion of, and presentation by both the applicant and the public. One is the hours of operation. 2 is the hours of deliveries. 3 is a mobilization for snow, not to include loading of materials during that time frame, outside of the 7 to 8 hour time frame. No off-site snow to be stored or moved onto the site. And in questions of the slope stability, we may want to consider specifying some type of slope, even though it's not called out onto the plans, that we feel it can be treatable and maintainable on that site. Those that have visited the site may remember that some of those slopes may be steeper than others across that, I'll call it the south side of the site, which is the side of the where the drainage structures are being proposed. I don't know what other conditions, other than the ones that are 1 through 18, as proposed by our staff, Mr. Rose.
Did you get, what did you make 18? No on-site snow? No off-site snow storage on site? 'Cause I only have
No,
17.
these others are topics of discussion.
18 was the last
Oh,
of
with,
mine.
on the,
with
when
the
you
parking.
supplement
Putting
it
the
with the
changes.
substitution and
the
the
parking,
addition. Okay,
yes.
that's right. This is 18 over here.
And that item 14, and sometimes there are directions indicating what actually happens at the fuel pump. And
15.
number 12, the fire extinguisher, was the only other one that I saw a comment on.
No, 15, the
15.
lighting.
And the lighting,
It was, I think what we were talking about was fueling in the dark, subject to zoning regulations on lighting.
okay.
That, if I could suggest,
Mm-hmm.
that language would be to assure safe and spill-free fueling during hours of operation that may be dark, subject to applicable zoning regulations.
Yes.
I don't even have to say it's dark, because even if it's during the daylight hours, it may be, you might like a light to see what you're doing. Especially if it's inside a containment, the tank is.
I guess my point is that regardless of the time, the light needs to be adequate to provide the use, and the zoning regulations for lighting apply.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know why we would restrict it to hours of operation.
Well.
Just a suggestion.
And let me just finish that, because Jim raised that point before in regards to the hours of operation. Because to a certain extent, you want to create something that can be operated and managed. And when you start restricting when a light can be turned on, which is what you're doing by that, I think you're opening a Pandora's box in regards to what a property owner's rights are on his property. I mean, a light can be turned on. And I think to the extent you set up all these restrictions, what you're doing is setting up the battlefield for monitoring. And, you know, the bottom line is the landscaping operation got the variance to operate in an agricultural zone, subject to, you know, regular business hours. Different landscape operations are gonna have different business hours, but nobody expects it to operate like a hair salon. So that's all I'm saying. I understand the point of wanting to restrict operations, but the reality is, we don't wanna become the setter of the standard for the monitoring. It's a use issue. So that's why.
Jim?
But the point of site plan approval is to try to create rules around uses that, among other things, minimizes the intrusion on abutters, in this case residential abutters. So I think it is reasonable to put on some restrictions on what they can do. For example, not leaving a light on 24 hours a day when it's not necessary, because even though our ordinance may allow it, doesn't directly shine off-site, that certainly is something that's not necessary, and it is an intrusion on people. I think that's exactly what you do under site plan review. So I guess I disagree to that extent. I think we can consider the location of this, the abutters, the nature of the operation, and put some reasonable restrictions. And to have a light that's not on all the time is one of those. It may be petty, but and similarly, restricting noisy operation at night, I think, is reasonable. And that's what we're trying to do. Now, you have to draw some lines in the sand. That's the nature of what we do.
Okay. Just going around the room,
If I can also
Yeah,
note,
Brian.
I don't think the intent of that condition is really to limit it to any certain hours. I think it's more intending to assure safe and spill-free fueling when it's dark. So, I mean, I don't know that it's an issue either way, but
I think it goes back to the hours of operation.
Right.
Already specifically in 7, talking about hours of operation, that's about the time, the hours that you could have a light on to be able to do something, whether it be the fueling station, whether it be the garage, or whether it be the salt shed. So if the use of light, external lights is limited to hours of operation, except for, I don't know, some kind of safety reason, which I can't see here, maybe that fits the bill. You've already stated it pretty much so in number 7.
All right, hypothetical.
Yes,
It's snowing.
yes,
I want my landscape guy to plow my driveway so I can get to work in the morning.
yes.
They leave at 3 in the morning to go. When they get in the truck, someone has forgotten to fill it with fuel, and they need fuel to leave the site to do the route. I want them to be able to fuel
I agree.
Safely.
safely, in accordance with regulations. That's my point.
And they're most likely gonna have to turn a light on.
That's fine. That's fine.
Then I think that's fine.
Doing permitted operations, you're gonna have a light on.
Okay.
Low.
Then what if they happen to forget to
Oh.
load the trucks
Yeah.
beforehand?
What ifs?
Yes, what if, what if, what if?
There's no,
We could do all the what-ifs.
it's not perfect. Not perfect.
Steve, got any quiet observations over there?
Nothing new. I'm good.
Back to Jim.
I'd be curious if any of the board members, unnamed board members, have views on this slope stability issue. But they don't have to express it. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were going around in order or just going around randomly. I withdraw the
You
question.
keep raising your hand up.
Well, I didn't,
Phil.
maybe it's
Well,
fine.
in response to slopes?
Sure.
I'm not an engineer.
Oh.
I'd leave that up to Megan.
Okay.
No, as far as a comment, hours of operation, I don't have a problem with it. I used to be in landscape business. I used to be foreman for maintenance crew, and we had 2 types of crews, which did regular maintenance that went out on scheduled jobs, weekly maintenance. Then we also had another crew that did all the pruning, new lawns, renovations, and all of that stuff, which was all done by contract. And summer hours, you came in, you worked basically like a farmer, sun up to sundown. We worked until you couldn't see anymore, and we went in and we were back in the morning. So, as Barbara mentioned, this is not the same operation as a hair salon.
Okay. Corey,
Also known as,
Carl. I knew I'd forget. I've got it written right here in the front of the paper here.
you're batting 50% today, that's not bad.
No, it's not bad.
I'm not a soil scientist, for the record, and I can only go by what, so I'm not a soil expert, if,
Okay.
just to clarify.
Jim, you are.
I know nothing about that. I'll admit I didn't get there in my undergraduate education.
Collis?
I'm not a geotechnical engineer, and I don't profess to have
I
expertise
don't
in
know.
that area. I know plenty about soils from my engineering background, but I'm comfortable with GSI's report. They've been around a long time, they're a reputable operation, they've put their PE stamp on this thing. They assume liability when they stamp these things, as any professional does. I'm comfortable with the report, and I'm willing to accept the findings and conclusions of the report. That aside, there is one new issue that came up tonight that I want to explore a little further, and that was the issue of equipment washdowns. And I think we need to look at that a little bit more closely. I mean, we're talking about commercial equipment that's being hosed down. I don't know where, I don't know how they're collecting the wash water. I mean, when we consider that we require automobile car washes to collect their wash water, handle it properly, treat it properly, and dispose of it properly, I mean, I think we ought to have some consideration given to that, and what, that's significant to me. I mean, you're hosing down backhoes and lawnmowers and trucks and stuff with all kinds of greases and oils and grass clippings I could deal with, but it's the other stuff that's being washed off the equipment that would concern me. And I think we ought to give some consideration to that.
Well, does the applicant in fact do that?
We heard testimony.
Well, I think the question more for me would be, is there a change in practice that's going to occur? Because there's been lots of testing done here that, as far as I recall, we're trying to prevent anything bad from happening with what we're doing. We haven't actually had a result that said something bad is happening. I mean, I may be wrong. Abutters have their views of whether the activity is going on, but has there been, I mean, I just view a car wash, and I know that they have to be contained systems and as a very different operation, and I don't know how different it is.
Automotive repair stations are the same, they're in the same situation. I mean, those types of facilities, I mean, you know, you're washing down equipment. We even see signs around town with the stencils on the pavement where there's a catch basin saying, you know, this leads to surface waters, don't wash your cars here and let it run. I mean, things like, I mean, we go to those sorts of things. I think we ought to consider that.
Yes, Jim?
Is there a standard to impose that would be a sort of recommended objective standard on that? Or
Some type of a platform with a drain that goes to a gas and oil separator that goes into the drainage system. Eliminates all the gas and oil, is treated separately.
Do we have a requirement for that? I mean, I don't know.
We have in effect, we've had a couple automotive situations that have gas and oil separators in. We probably never discussed it, but they were on the site plans.
Question?
Yes.
Do we require it on the landscape business in Penardra?
Did we? The answer is no.
I don't think we did on Pro Landscape either.
No.
No, I don't think, no. It's not a condition on pro landscape.
But just because you don't one time doesn't mean you can't say, geez, we should have.
Let's see.
And certainly you can consider the topography of this site, where that water runs.
I'll ask our seer over here, is it okay to ask the applicant a question?
Well, we can reopen the public hearing on a very limited issue.
I don't want this environmental issue to be a shortfall in things if we haven't addressed it accordingly.
I mean, can we make it a condition that the applicant has to present for approval of wastewater collection?
Sure we can.
I'm speaking off the top of my head here, and it's late, so it's maybe,
We've got 5 minutes.
I don't know.
I would make it a condition. Subsequent, is it subsequent? Yeah.
Well, it's a condition before you can.
A wastewater treatment plan for what? I mean, exactly for what? I mean, I think when you have I'm just trying to put my hands around how you would even give the applicant enough direction to, do we have an assumption of vehicle maintenance being done on property and so many oil changes a year? Do we have an assumption on what his vehicle fleet is gonna be? Do we have an assumption on how many times the vehicle is gonna be watched? And if we do, then we're talking about a giant what-if, and then how do you structure the requirement if there's not something specific in a regs? I mean, I'm just trying to
Well,
figure out how we would do it.
Perhaps we direct them to those who have experience and expertise in that, and that would be one of the bureaus at DES. I mean, they deal with those types of issues. I mean, maybe as simple as a condition that requires them to employ best management practices
Yeah.
as set forth in a fact sheet from DES when it comes to equipment washing. I'll bet there is one.
I know there is.
You know, without, so, I mean, it's not particularly onerous on us, but it addresses the issue. When we employ a BMP, that's the best we can do.
Could I make another suggestion of a possible solution to the problem is just to make a condition that vehicles not be washed on the property?
Yeah, I think that's a little burdensome, personally, as a member of the board.
I think that's a
Can I ask
burdensome.
a question?
That may be a cheaper option than
Well, it's
actually requiring
That would be
a,
up to the applicant then.
Bill?
Can I ask a question? Okay, I guess, if I have a piece of equipment, and it's on a trailer, and it's behind my truck, it's out in my driveway, okay? And I come in from a job, and it's got mud all over it from the job that I was operating in. And it sits out there. What is the difference if I go out there and hose it off with my hose, or I let it sit out there in the rain?
Don't know if there is any difference, but does that relieve you of environmental laws that prohibit?
No, well, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, the only thing that I see that I'm depositing in my driveway is the soil that this piece of the equipment was in and my vehicle was in.
The soil?
That's on the vehicle from the location that I
And
was operating.
Well, I mean, I guess that depends on how well you maintain your vehicles. I'm talking about fluids.
But I don't think that's a function of my washing my vehicle if I allow a hose to be leaking from my transmission or my brake lines. I think that's a separate mechanical issue, that's not an issue of hosing down the vehicle.
Megan, you're smiling as this conversation is going back and forth.
No, no.
So you have the answer.
No, I don't have the answer, I had thought about this, and we actually talked about it at my office, about the phase 2 stormwater requirements, and we had come to the determination that this lot, I believe, was like outside the limits of that, can't remember the right words, but, you know, because we're a phase 2 community, the, MS4 community, I guess, there's certain limits, you know, in which some of those car washes and all that, I had talked to Carl about it, and it sounded like really it was just the car washes that have to follow those strict rules, and I believe that had come up because, you know, we have different groups that do little car washes in different areas, and it sounded like, in talking to Carl, that those aren't subject to the same things as a commercial car wash. Because I brought this up to him that it had come up once before, and so I sat down with Carl and with Alex, who's our environmental guy, to just talk about it, and we bounced off, you know, a couple things, and we didn't think that this was gonna be subject to that kind of strict, you know, containing the water, the washing water and whatnot. One suggestion I had is they're already required to do monitoring for the sodium and chloride. Could you add some kind of parameter to their monitoring to be checking for something? And if it became a problem, that it comes back in front of the board, and maybe at that point, we'd have to look at a more permanent, like, treatment kind of system. But could it be added, if they're already doing monitoring of certain points and certain, you know, times of year, is there a parameter that we could add to that? You know, like petroleum level or something, so if, you know, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of.
I just think that's more cumbersome than directing them to follow best management practices as DES. And I'll bet you they're out there.
Yeah, I'm not aware of what the BMP list would be for that, and is that BMP list?
I think it's cleaner and easier, so.
Commercial? Like,
Yeah, I think it is, yeah,
usage
yeah. I can't state with any certainty, but you know, if within an hour tomorrow morning, you could figure it out. You know, and then you leave it up to the applicant. You either follow the BMPs or you wash it off-site somewhere. I I mean, that would be the applicant's choice. And my suspicion is the BMP is not gonna be that particularly onerous, but I don't know that for a fact.
I just know like at, DPW facilities, and there can be really expansive systems of collecting.
Well, yeah, but you guys are doing massive.
Well, that's, I just don't
oil
know what the
changes
different
and
levels
hydraulic
of
fuel.
collecting this wash water are. I don't know if it's kind of an all or nothing and it's a big fancy
Yeah.
system, or if there are some kind of smaller systems for smaller commercial uses or what, so I'm not familiar with that.
Have we worked this around sufficiently?
Can I
No?
just ask Hollis a question?
Yes, you
When
can.
you talk about best management practices for DES, are you talking in regards to the washing of equipment?
Yeah, yes.
Things are pretty quiet. I believe I could entertain a question from Mr. Neiman as a member of the Conservation Commission. David?
Very quick. So part of the operation is distributing salt. If you're rinsing down the trucks, then rinsing the salt off might be another component, not just mud. You're taking great precautions to how you're going to deal with salt, so I just wanted to mention that.
That's true.
There's already a BMP on the salt thing anyways.
Well, I thought it was smaller.
And they're already doing that in some instances already, Dave.
Yeah, we are monitoring, so.
Yeah. Okay. Jim?
I'd like to make a motion to approve with conditions.
Okay.
The conditions are set forth in 1 through 17, with the changes in 14 that was discussed, or whatever demonstrate means, which means, I guess, to post is required by the fire department, that the fall through a hole in the space-time continuum and figure out how to permanently mount a portable fire extinguisher, or change the wording.
Use sky hooks.
That the number 15 be modified to be during times of operation, subject to the lighting restrictions in the zoning ordinance. The number 17, well, that the changes be made to the conditions, the additions as stated in Brian's October 14th memo, and that number 10 be modified to include best management practices as outlined for DES, to append to the end of that sentence, and for washing equipment on site.
And could you add a requirement for no off-site snow storage on site?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, add that. And then finally, the hours of operation, number 7, to try to clarify that, I'll take a run at it, that the applicant will conduct normal operations during the times specified, but may operate his snow plowing operations during other times as necessary, but not loading of equipment or any other activities that would be a nuisance.
Anything about slope steepness or whatever, or just go with the report as developed by GSI?
I think, yeah, I don't think we have enough evidence, this is not part of my motion, but a comment to, although I understand what Mr. Miller said, to find that the GSI report signed by an engineer is inadequate. The applicant is, liable if that fails, but I don't think we have enough to say that if they didn't meet the,
Were we
do
gonna,
what we require them to do.
were we gonna 18 about parking spaces? Was some
That
discussion?
was one of the ones
that's
that
added by
he incorporated.
The October 14 memo adds,
Okay.
modifies 7, replaces.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. 10, I modified the previous one. I guess I should, Gail, make that addition to 10 be on the one that's on Brian's October 14 memo. part of the punctuation. And then 18, the new condition was added.
I'd second that motion.
There's a motion by Jim and seconded by Collis. Any discussion on the motion? I'll go around the table. Lowell?
Nothing further.
Steve?
Nothing.
Bill? Carl?
No.
That's how you look.
He saw me look. Jim?
No.
Collis? Barbara?
No.
Seeing no further comments, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Who was the alternate voting on this?
Steve. And the chair votes yes, so the project has approved unanimously. Thank you. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Before we adjourn, could I get on the record that we actually don't have anything scheduled on the 28th yet?
Well, I was just gonna ask that question before we adjourn, was, if there's nothing on the schedule for the 28th, what would we normally do?
Go fishing.
We discuss zoning again.
So, as members of the board, be
Zoning
ready to
ordinance.
discuss zoning, development regulations,
Okay.
and the master plan.
All right, okay.
There'll be agenda circulated.
Is there a second on the motion to adjourn?
Yeah, Colin.
Yes,
Collis?
yes.
You're a team over there, I don't know. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're all going home. Thank you.